Hello, friends. Welcome to the Sleep Aliens. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The night sky is definitely an interesting realm, and perhaps more is going on along our coast than we are giving it credit for. The story that we're going to spin for you tonight is the journey of Jenna Rorfield and Owen Kessler, two people who would never lead the same kind of life again, thanks to the presence of something resting just above the Atlantic Ocean. So, sit back and get ready to let the darkness drive. The Oregon coast has never been a kind place. But then November 2019 arrived with the sort of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. The sort that leads a sane person to wonder what kind of masochist would deliberately choose to live this far north on the edge of the world. Jenna Rorfield wasn't there by choice. In fact, it wasn't a choice she made for herself. Rather, it was a place that needed a lighthouse keeper. And she needed a place that wouldn't wonder why a 28-year-old marine biologist had abandoned a promising career in Seattle. The lighthouse stood on a rocky promontory that jutted into the Pacific like an accusing finger. During storm season, waves crashed against the cliff face with such violence that the whole structure would shake, rattling the windows in their frames and making the spiral staircase hum like a tuning fork. Jenna had grown used to it. What she hadn't grown used to was the silence that came after, when the ocean would suddenly go still, as if something beneath the surface had commanded it to be quiet. It was on one of those unnaturally calm nights that she first saw it. She'd been updating the lighthouse log, a habit she'd maintained even though the light itself was automated now and tourists only visited during summer months. The log was leather-bound and old, its pages yellowed with salt air and time. Previous keepers had documented everything from ship passages to unusual weather patterns, and Jenna found comfort in continuing the tradition. She was writing about the unexpected calm when movement outside the window caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a boat. The light was blue, a deep electric blue that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. But as she pressed her face against the cold glass, she realized it wasn't moving like a boat at all. It was hovering, perfectly still, about 50 feet above the water and maybe 200 yards from shore. Jenna grabbed her binoculars, the expensive ones she'd used for whale watching back when that kind of thing still interested her. Through the lenses, the sphere came into sharp focus. It was roughly the size of a small car, though its exact dimensions were hard to determine because its edges seemed to blur and shimmer, as if the object existed slightly out of phase with reality. The blue light it emitted wasn't uniform either. It rippled across its surface in waves, darker blues chasing lighter ones in patterns that almost looked deliberate. What struck her most was how it didn't behave like any light source she'd ever seen. The glow didn't reflect off the water beneath it. The waves, which should have been illuminated by something that bright, remained dark and glossy, as if the sphere's light existed in a different spectrum altogether. She watched for nearly 10 minutes, her breath fogging the binocular lenses before the sphere simply blinked out of existence. No fade, no movement. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. She wrote it all down in the log, her handwriting shaky from cold or adrenaline or both. Then she made herself a cup of tea and tried to convince herself she'd imagined it. But when she looked out the window again an hour later, the sphere was back. This time, closer to shore. By the third night, Jenna had established a pattern. The sphere appeared around 2:47 a.m., give or take 3 minutes. It would hover in the same general area, though never in exactly the same spot, and it would stay for anywhere from 8 to 20 minutes before vanishing. She started photographing it with her phone, but the images came out blurred and distorted, the blue light bleeding across the screen in ways that made no photographic sense. On the seventh night, she called Owen Kessler. Owen was a Marine Patrol officer based out of Cannon Beach, and more importantly, he was one of the few people from Jenna's old life who still talked to her. They'd met at a conference years ago, back when she still believed marine biology would save her from the restlessness that had plagued her since childhood. He'd been lecturing about coastal security, she'd been presenting on bioluminescent organisms, and they'd ended up sharing drinks and stories until the hotel bar closed. "Jenna?" His voice was thick with sleep when he answered. "Do you know what time it is?" "I need you to come to the lighthouse." She kept her eyes on the sphere, which tonight was doing something new. It was moving, not horizontally but vertically, rising and falling in a slow, deliberate rhythm that reminded her of breathing. "There's something out here. Something I can't explain. Is someone in trouble?" "No, yes, I don't know." She pressed her forehead against the window, feeling the cold seep into her skin. "Just come, please." Owen arrived 43 minutes later, his patrol boat cutting through the dark water with its running lights dimmed. Jenna met him at the small dock at the base of the lighthouse cliff, and before he could say anything, she grabbed his arm and pointed. The sphere was there, closer than it had ever been, maybe 100 yards offshore now. It hung in the air like a piece of the sky had broken off and decided to hover, and in its pulsing blue light, Owen's face went slack with disbelief. "What the hell is that?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. "I was hoping you could tell me." Jenna's grip on his arm tightened. "You're the one with security clearance. You're the one who deals with smugglers and suspicious vessels. Have you ever seen anything like this?" Owen shook his head slowly, unable to tear his eyes away from the sphere. "Never. Not in 20 years of coastal patrol." He started to reach for his radio, then stopped. "Who would I even call? What would I say?" They stood there together, watching it pulse and breathe, and Jenna felt something shift in the air around them. It wasn't a temperature change exactly, though her skin prickled with sudden cold. It was more like a pressure change, the kind you feel before a storm, except the sky above them was clear and star-filled. "It doesn't cast light," she said, more to break the silence than anything else. "Look at the water beneath it. It should be lit up, but it's not." Owen pulled out his own flashlight and aimed it at the water. The beam cut across the waves in a normal, expected way, reflecting and refracting like light should. But the sphere's blue glow seemed to exist in its own reality, touching nothing, affecting nothing except the two people watching it. "I'm going closer," Owen said suddenly, and before Jenna could protest, he was climbing back into his patrol boat. "Owen, wait!" But he'd already started the engine and the boat was pulling away from the dock. Jenna watched from the shore, her heart hammering against her ribs as the patrol boat cut through the dark water toward the sphere. The distance closed quickly. 50 yards, 25:10. Owen killed the engine when he was directly beneath it, and in the sudden silence Jenna could hear her own ragged breathing. The sphere pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then something impossible happened. The light didn't shine down onto Owen's face. It shouldn't have been able to reach him at all, given how it refused to interact with the water or air or anything else. But Jenna saw him clearly in that moment, saw his face tilted upward, and his expression was one of absolute terror. His mouth opened in what might have been a shout or a scream, but no sound reached her across the water. Then the blue light intensified, became almost white, and Jenna had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, the sphere was gone. Just gone. And Owen's boat was rocking gently on waves that had suddenly returned, as if the ocean itself had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. She called out to him, her voice cracking, but he didn't respond. The boat drifted for a moment, engine silent, and then Owen slumped forward onto the controls. The horn blared once, startling a nearby seabird into flight, and then cut off. Jenna ran. She ran back up the cliff path to the lighthouse, grabbed her own small motorboat from the keeper's dock on the sheltered side, and drove it around the promontory with reckless speed. By the time she reached Owen's patrol boat, 7 minutes had passed. 7 minutes during which anything could have happened. Owen was alive but unconscious, his skin cold to the touch and his breathing shallow. There were no marks on him, no signs of injury, but when Jenna lifted one of his eyelids to check his pupils, she saw something that made her stomach drop. His eyes weren't reflecting the beam from her flashlight. They were reflecting blue, the same electric blue as the sphere, even though the sphere was gone and there was nothing around them but darkness and water. She radioed for help, gave their coordinates, and started the patrol boat's engine to head back to shore. As she did, she noticed something strange about the water. The waves weren't behaving right. They were moving in patterns that didn't match the wind or current, swirling around the boat in concentric circles that grew wider and wider until they finally broke apart and returned to normal chaos. By the time the Coast Guard arrived 20 minutes later, Owen had started to wake up. His first words were, "Did you see it?" His voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming, though Jenna had heard nothing across the water. "Did you see what it showed me?" "I saw you under it," Jenna said, gripping his hand. "I saw the light hit your face." "No." Owen shook his head, then winced as if the movement caused pain. "You don't understand. It didn't just hit my face, it went inside my head. It showed me things, Jenna. Things that haven't happened yet. Things that might never happen. I saw the ocean empty. I saw everything dead, and I saw us, you and me, standing on a beach that doesn't exist anymore, watching the sky tear itself apart." The Coast Guard medics took Owen to the mainland hospital, and Jenna returned to the lighthouse alone. She spent the rest of the night in the observation room, watching the ocean, but the sphere didn't return. Instead, just before dawn, she saw something else. Lights in the water itself. Not on the surface, but deep below. Dozens of them, blue, and pulsing in the same rhythm the sphere had used. They moved beneath the waves like a school of fish, heading south along the coastline, and they stayed visible for almost an hour before finally fading into the pre-dawn gloom. Jenna wrote it all in the log. Every detail, every impossibility. Then she called Owen's cell phone, even though she knew he was probably still sedated in a hospital bed. He answered on the third ring. "It's still in my head," he said without preamble. "The things it showed me. Every time I close my eyes, I see them. And Jenna, there's something else. I can hear it now. Even here, miles from the ocean, I can hear something calling from the water. It sounds like singing, but the words aren't in any language I recognize." "What did it want?" Jenna whispered. "Why did it come here?" "I don't think it wanted anything," Owen said. "I think it was looking for something, or someone, and I think it found them." The line went silent for a moment, and Jenna could hear the rhythmic beeping of hospital equipment in the background. Then Owen spoke again, his voice barely audible. "Check the lighthouse log. Go back through the old entries. I have a feeling we're not the first ones to see it." Jenna spent the next 3 days reading through decades of lighthouse logs. Most entries were mundane, recordings of weather and shipping traffic and the occasional whale sighting. But scattered throughout the decades, she found them. Brief mentions, often dismissed or explained away, of strange lights over the water. Blue lights, spherical lights. Lights that didn't behave the way light should. The earliest entry she found was from 1952, written in cramped handwriting by a keeper named Douglas Marsh. Witnessed unusual luminescence approximately 200 yards offshore. 2:45 a.m. Sphere-like in appearance, deep blue in color. Did not illuminate surrounding water. Duration, 12 minutes. Weather, calm, clear. No ships in vicinity. Note, similar light reported by fishermen 3 days prior. They claim it followed their boat for several miles before vanishing. Local Tillamook tribe elder says his grandfather spoke of ghost lights that came before the fish disappeared in 1889. Jenna photographed the page, along with half a dozen others spanning different decades, all describing the same phenomenon. Then she called Owen again. They've been here for decades, she told him. Maybe longer. The Tillamook knew about them. And Owen, there's a pattern. Every recorded sighting happens in late fall, always between 2:30 and 3 a.m., and always during periods of unusual calm. I'm being discharged tomorrow, Owen said. My scans came back normal. Physically, I'm fine. But Jenna, I can't stop hearing it. The singing, it's getting louder. Maybe you should stay away from the coast for a while, Jenna suggested, though she knew it was pointless. Whatever had happened to him under that sphere had created a connection that distance wouldn't break. I'm coming back to the lighthouse, Owen insisted. If it appears again, I need to be there. I need to understand what it showed me. But the sphere didn't appear the next night, or the night after. In fact, November passed into December without another sighting, and Jenna began to wonder if perhaps it had been a one-time event, a cosmic accident that had briefly torn a hole between their world and something else. She should have known better. The ocean always keeps its promises, even the terrible ones. It was December 18th when everything changed. Jenna had been tracking an unusual weather pattern, a high-pressure system that had stalled off the coast and created the kind of perfect calm that happens maybe once or twice a decade. The ocean looked like glass. No wind, no waves, just an endless mirror reflecting the stars above. Owen arrived at the lighthouse just after midnight, carrying a waterproof case full of equipment. Cameras, recording devices, sensors she didn't recognize. He looked thinner than she remembered, his eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. I've been researching, he said by way of greeting. Talking to people who've seen things they can't explain. There's a whole network of us, Jenna. Fishermen, Coast Guard, lighthouse keepers, people who've seen the spheres. And there are patterns. Not just the time and weather, but something else. They appear more frequently near places where the continental shelf drops off dramatically. Places where the ocean gets deep fast. Like here, Jenna said quietly, looking out at the water. Like here, and there's something else. A researcher at Oregon State, Dr. Marcus Kelly. Jenna flinched at the name, but Owen continued. He's been studying unusual acoustic signatures in the deep ocean. Sounds that don't match any known marine life or geological activity. He says they're strongest along this stretch of coast, and they intensify during the same periods when the spheres are reported. Jenna wanted to tell him about Kelly, about why she'd left Seattle, about the research that had cost her everything. But before she could speak, Owen grabbed her arm, his grip painfully tight. "It's here," he whispered. And it was. Not just one sphere this time, but 3, arranged in a perfect triangle about 100 yards offshore. They pulsed in sequence, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, their blue light creating complex patterns in the air that shouldn't have been possible. Light doesn't work that way. Light doesn't create geometry. But these did. And as Jenna and Owen watched, frozen in place, the patterns grew more complex. The spheres began to move, not randomly but with clear purpose, weaving around each other in a dance that felt ancient and deliberate. The temperature dropped. Jenna's breath came out in visible puffs, even though December in coastal Oregon was cold, but rarely that cold. They're communicating. Owen said, his voice distant, entranced. "Can you feel it? They're talking to each other, or to us, or to something else entirely." Jenna could feel it. A pressure in her skull, like the onset of a migraine but sharper, more focused. And beneath that, something that might have been sound, or might have been something else entirely, a sensation that bypassed her ears and went straight into her brain. Owen was right. It did sound like singing, if singing could exist without voice or music or anything recognizable as sound. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the spheres went dark. All three at once. But the pressure in Jenna's head didn't ease. If anything, it intensified, and she realized with growing horror that the spheres hadn't disappeared. They'd simply stopped emitting light. They were still there, invisible against the dark water, and she knew this with the same certainty she knew her own name. "Owen," she said, but he was already moving, heading down the cliff path toward the dock. "I have to get closer," he called back. "I have to understand." "No!" Jenna ran after him, her boots slipping on the wet stone. "Don't you remember what happened last time? It showed you terrible things. It showed me the truth." Owen stopped at the edge of the dock, turning to face her. In the dim light from the lighthouse, his face looked gaunt, almost skeletal. "Whatever these things are, they're not here to hurt us. They're here to warn us, and I need to know what they're warning us about." Before Jenna could stop him, he jumped into his patrol boat and started the engine. The sound seemed obscenely loud in the unnatural calm, and as the boat pulled away from the dock, Jenna felt the pressure in her head spike so sharply that she gasped and staggered backward. And that's when she heard it. The singing Owen had described. It wasn't coming from the water or the sky or anywhere external. It was coming from inside her own mind, words in a language she'd never learned but somehow understood. They spoke of depths beyond measuring, of intelligence older than humanity, of watchers who had been here long before the first humans walked the coast and would remain long after the last ones were gone. Out on the water, Owen had reached the spot where the spheres had been. His boat drifted to a stop, engine idling, and Jenna watched as he stood up in the stern, arms outstretched like he was greeting old friends or accepting an embrace. The spheres became visible again, but differently than before. Instead of glowing blue, they now seemed to absorb light, 3 patches of darkness that were somehow more than absence, more than void. They descended slowly, deliberately, until they hovered just above the boat, just above Owen, and in that moment, Jenna saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Owen's shadow, cast by the lighthouse beam, wasn't his own. It was something else, something with too many limbs and a shape that hurt to look at. And when he opened his mouth to speak or scream, blue light poured out, the same shade as the spheres, as if he'd swallowed a piece of them or they'd planted a piece of themselves inside him. Then everything went white. Not bright, not burning, just white. A colorless, toneless white that swallowed the ocean and the sky and the lighthouse and Jenna herself, and in that whiteness, she heard a sound like the world cracking open. When her vision returned, seconds later, minutes, hours, the spheres were gone, the ocean was dark again, and Owen's patrol boat was empty, rocking gently in waves that had somehow returned without her noticing. She called his name. No response. She called again, her voice breaking, echoing across the empty water. Still nothing. Just the sound of waves and the distant cry of a nightbird, and the terrible, overwhelming silence of the ocean keeping its secrets. The Coast Guard found Owen 3 days later, washed up on a beach 15 miles south of the lighthouse. He was alive but unresponsive, his eyes open and staring at nothing, or perhaps at something only he could see. The doctor said he was in some kind of catatonic state, that his brain showed activity but he wasn't processing external stimuli. They said it might be psychological trauma, or it might be something neurological they couldn't identify. They said he might recover. They said he might not. Jenna visited him in the hospital every day for 2 weeks. She sat beside his bed and read him entries from the lighthouse log, describing the weather and the waves and the ships that passed by, maintaining the tradition even though she knew he probably couldn't hear her. And every night she returned to the lighthouse and watched the ocean, waiting for the spheres to come back. They didn't. Not in December, not in January. But the singing in her head never stopped. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, she would see lights moving deep beneath the waves, and she would wonder if Owen had been right. If the spheres weren't visitors at all, but residents of the deep ocean, rising periodically to the surface to observe or communicate or warn. And if so, what were they warning her about? What had they shown Owen that had broken something fundamental in his mind? What truth had he glimpsed that was too terrible to survive intact? She wrote it all down in the lighthouse log, knowing that someday, years or decades from now, another keeper would read her words and wonder. And maybe that next keeper would see the spheres too, and maybe they would be brave enough or foolish enough to get closer than she had, to learn what Owen had learned. Or maybe they would be smart enough to turn away, to pretend they'd seen nothing, to let the ocean keep its secrets and the spheres maintain their silent vigil over depths that humanity was never meant to understand. Either way, Jenna knew one thing with absolute certainty. The spheres would return. They always did. The patterns in the lighthouse log proved that. They'd been coming to this stretch of coast for generations, appearing and disappearing according to some schedule or purpose that existed beyond human comprehension. And when they came back, Jenna would be waiting, pen in hand, ready to document whatever happened next in the endless cycle of watching and being watched, of seeking and being sought, of humans trying desperately to understand phenomena that might not want to be understood at all. The hospital where they'd taken Owen was in Newport, a 40-minute drive down Highway 101 from the lighthouse. Jenna made the trip every evening after updating the day's log, usually arriving just as visiting hours were ending. The nurses had stopped questioning her relationship to the patient. She'd simply said colleague the first time, and they'd accepted it without further inquiry. Tonight was different. When Jenna arrived at Owen's room, she found Dr. Sarah Rivera waiting outside the door. Rivera was a neurologist who'd been consulting on Owen's case, a sharp-eyed woman in her mid-40s who'd built a reputation for solving medical mysteries that other doctors gave up on. "Miss Rohrfield," Rivera said, gesturing for Jenna to follow her down the hall toward a private consultation room. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened to Officer Kessler." Jenna's stomach tightened. She'd given her statement to the Coast Guard, to the police, to anyone who'd asked. She'd told them Owen had gone out on the water to investigate unusual lights and had somehow ended up in the ocean. She hadn't mentioned the spheres, the singing, the way his shadow had stopped being his own. Who would believe her? "I've already explained everything I know," Jenna said carefully. "I'm not interested in what you told the police." Rivera closed the consultation room door and pulled out a tablet, tapping through several brain scans. "I'm interested in the truth, because Officer Kessler's condition doesn't match any known pathology. His brain is functioning, but it's functioning wrong. The activity patterns are all off. It's like someone rewired his neural pathways and left out the instruction manual." Jenna stared at the scans, not understanding what she was seeing, but feeling a deep unease nonetheless. "What does that mean?" "It means something happened to him that I can't explain medically, and when I reviewed his case file, I found something interesting. He told the Coast Guard medics, before he became unresponsive, that lights had gone inside his head, His exact words. Rivera locked eyes with Jenna. "I need to know if you saw those lights, because if you did, I need to understand what we're dealing with." For a long moment, Jenna said nothing. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Blue spheres. Over the ocean. They don't reflect light the way normal objects do. And when Owen got close to them, something happened. He collapsed. And when he woke up, he said they'd shown him things. Terrible things." Rivera didn't look surprised. "How many spheres?" "3. The second time. The first time it was just 1. Jenna hesitated. "Why aren't you calling security? Why aren't you having me committed?" "Because," Rivera said quietly, pulling up another file on her tablet, "Owen isn't the first patient I've seen with this exact pattern of brain activity. There have been others over the years, not many, but enough to form a pattern. And every single one of them, before they became unresponsive, talked about lights in the sky or over the water. Blue lights, spherical lights, lights that showed them impossible things. The consultation room suddenly felt too small, too confined." Jenna's breath came faster. "What happened to the others?" "Most of them recovered eventually, days, weeks, sometimes months later. They woke up with no memory of what happened, or with memories so fragmented they couldn't piece together a coherent narrative. But a few—" Rivera paused, her expression troubled. "A few never woke up at all. They remained in this in-between state, conscious but unreachable, for years until their bodies finally gave out." "And you think that might happen to Owen?" "I think whatever those lights are, they're doing something to the human brain that we don't understand and can't treat. But I also think there might be a way to help him." Rivera pulled up a map on her tablet, zooming in on the Oregon coast. "I've been tracking reports of unusual phenomena along this stretch of coastline for the past 15 years. Lights, acoustic anomalies, instances of missing time reported by fishermen and tourists. There's a concentration of activity around 3 specific locations, and your lighthouse is one of them." She marked 3 spots on the map. Tillamook Head, where Jenna's lighthouse stood. Yaquina Head, about 30 miles south. And a spot even further south near Hesita Head, where the continental shelf dropped away into some of the deepest water off the Oregon coast. "If I'm right," Rivera continued, "these locations are significant for some reason. And if we want to understand what happened to Owen, we need to go to one of these places when the phenomena occur again." "You want to study them," Jenna said flatly. "You want to treat them like lab specimens." "I want to save my patient," Rivera corrected, "and I want to understand what we're dealing with before more people end up like him. Will you help me?" Jenna thought about the lighthouse log, about decades of keepers documenting the same phenomena and getting no closer to understanding them. She thought about Owen's empty eyes staring at something only he could see. She thought about the singing that still echoed in her own head, quieter now, but never completely gone. "On one condition," she said finally. "If we do this, we document everything. Every observation, every measurement, everything that happens. And when we're done, we make it public. No classified reports, no government seizure of evidence. People have a right to know." Rivera considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. I'll have equipment sent to the lighthouse. Cameras, audio recorders, electromagnetic sensors, everything we might need. And I'll bring a medical team. If someone has another close encounter, I want to be there to monitor their vital signs in real time." They shook hands, and Jenna felt like she'd just made a deal with the devil. But what choice did she have? Owen was trapped in whatever vision the spheres had given him, and if there was any chance of bringing him back, she had to take it. Before leaving the hospital, Jenna stopped by Owen's room one more time. He lay exactly as he had for weeks, his eyes open and unblinking, his chest rising and falling with mechanical regularity. But tonight, as she sat down beside his bed, she noticed something new. His lips were moving. Just slightly, barely perceptible, but definitely moving. Forming words without sound, repeating the same phrase over and over. Jenna leaned closer, trying to read his lips, and after several repetitions she understood what he was saying. They're waking up. A chill ran down her spine. Who's waking up, Owen? What did they show you? But he didn't respond, didn't even seem to know she was there. He just kept repeating those two words, over and over, his eyes staring at nothing, while his mouth shaped a warning that no one but Jenna could see. She left the hospital and drove back to the lighthouse through darkness so complete it felt like the world had ended, and she was the only person left alive. The highway was empty, the forest on either side black and impenetrable, and somewhere out in the ocean, beneath thousands of feet of dark water, something was stirring. When she reached the lighthouse, she found equipment already being delivered. Rivera had moved fast. There were cases of sensors and cameras, portable generators, medical monitors. A team of technicians was setting everything up under the lighthouse beam, working efficiently despite the late hour. Rivera herself was there, coordinating the installation, and when she saw Jenna, she waved her over. "We picked up something on the deep-sea acoustic monitors," she said, pulling up a waveform on her laptop. "The same pattern that appears before the visual phenomena. Whatever causes the spheres to appear, it starts deep underwater, probably along the continental shelf. The sounds propagate upward, and then the spheres manifest on the surface." Jenna studied the waveform. It didn't look like anything she'd seen in her marine biology days. The frequency was too low, the pattern too regular. "This doesn't match any known marine life." "No," Rivera agreed. "It doesn't. And here's the interesting part. This pattern has been recorded intermittently for decades, but its frequency has been increasing. In the 1950s, it appeared maybe once or twice a year. By the 1990s, it was happening monthly. And now," she pulled up more recent data, "it's happening weekly, sometimes more often." "They're waking up," Jenna whispered, remembering Owen's silent words. "What?" "Owen, in the hospital. He's been repeating those words. They're waking up. Whatever these things are, they're becoming more active." Rivera's expression darkened. "Then we need to understand them fast, because if this pattern continues to accelerate..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. If something ancient and incomprehensible was waking up beneath the Pacific Ocean, and if its awakening was affecting human minds in ways that medicine couldn't treat, then they were facing something far beyond a scientific curiosity. They were facing a threat. Over the next 3 weeks, they monitored the ocean constantly. The sensors picked up the deep-sea acoustic pattern 7 times, and each time, the spheres appeared within an hour. Always at night, always during periods of unusual calm, and always in groups of 3 arranged in geometric patterns that seemed to shift and evolve with each appearance. Jenna documented everything in the lighthouse log, cross-referencing her observations with the sensor data. She noticed patterns that the equipment couldn't capture. The way the air pressure changed just before the spheres manifested. The way certain seabirds would flee the area minutes in advance. The way her own body reacted, that pressure in her skull like a migraine building. The singing that would intensify until the spheres appeared and then suddenly cut off. Rivera noticed it too. "You're developing a sensitivity to them," she said during one of their long nights of observation. "Your brain is learning to detect whatever precursor phenomena announces their arrival. It's like how some people can feel earthquakes coming before the sensors pick them up." "Is that what happened to Owen?" Jenna asked. Did he become too sensitive? Did he let them in too far? Maybe. Or maybe he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they chose him for reasons we don't understand. Rivera paused, studying a readout from one of the medical monitors they'd set up. I've been reviewing the cases of people who recovered from close encounters. The ones who could remember anything said the spheres communicated through images and emotions rather than words. They said they were shown the history of the ocean, eons of deep time compressed into seconds. And they said they came away with the overwhelming sense that humanity is a temporary phenomenon, that we've been here for an evolutionary eye blink and will be gone just as quickly. Cheerful, Jenna muttered. But she couldn't shake the feeling that it was true. Standing here on the edge of the continent, watching ancient lights perform dances that might be communication or might be something humans had no framework to understand. She felt the weight of geological time pressing down on her. The lighthouse had stood for barely a century. The rocky promontory it stood on had been here for millions of years, and whatever created those spheres had probably been in the ocean before the first humans evolved, before the first primates, maybe before the first mammals. On the 24th night of their vigil, everything changed. The acoustic sensors picked up the familiar pattern, but this time it was different, louder, more complex. And it wasn't coming from one direction, but from all directions at once, as if the entire stretch of ocean was responding to some unheard call. Something's wrong, Rivera said, studying her laptop screen with growing alarm. The signal strength is off the charts. This isn't normal. This isn't like any of the previous occurrences. Jenna stepped outside onto the lighthouse platform, and her breath caught. The ocean was glowing, not with reflected moonlight or bioluminescence, but with that same deep blue light the spheres emitted. It came from beneath the surface, illuminating the waves from below, and as she watched, spheres began to rise from the water. Not 3 this time, not 5 or 10. Dozens, maybe hundreds. They emerged from the ocean like bubbles from a deep-sea vent, rising into the air and spreading out across the sky in formations that hurt to look at directly. The geometry was wrong, somehow. The angles didn't make sense. Looking at them made Jenna's eyes water and her head pound. "Rivera!" she shouted. "Get out here!" But Rivera was already there along with her entire team, and they were all staring at the impossible sight above them. The spheres had formed into a structure, something that might have been a spiral, or might have been a sphere itself, too large to comprehend. And from the center of this structure, something was emerging. It wasn't physical exactly, or maybe it was, but Jenna's mind couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. It looked like water given form, like the ocean itself had decided to rise up and take shape. It flowed and shifted, never settling into any single configuration, and where the moonlight touched it, colors appeared that Jenna had never seen before, shades that existed outside the normal spectrum. "What is that?" one of Rivera's technicians whispered, his voice barely audible. No one answered. How could they? There were no words for what they were witnessing. The thing, entity, presence, whatever it was, hung above the ocean like a question mark, like a challenge, like an invitation or a warning. And then it began to sing. This wasn't the subtle singing Jenna had heard in her head. This was sound, real, physical sound that you could feel in your bones and your teeth. It resonated at frequencies that made the lighthouse structure vibrate and cause the windows to crack. But beneath the physical sound was something else, something that bypassed hearing entirely and went straight into memory and emotion. Jenna saw things. Not with her eyes, but with some other sense she didn't know she possessed. She saw the ocean as it had been millions of years ago, teeming with life forms that no longer existed. She saw asteroids striking the Earth, turning the sea to steam. She saw the slow cooling, the return of life, the endless cycle of evolution and extinction. She saw the first humans standing on this very shore, staring out at the water with fear and wonder. And she saw the future. Oh God, she saw the future. Oceans rising, cities drowning, the coastlines redrawn, and through it all the spheres, watching, documenting, waiting. They weren't here to stop it. They weren't here to save humanity. They were here to witness, the way a naturalist might observe a species going extinct, with scientific detachment and perhaps a touch of sadness for the inevitability of it all. When the vision ended, seconds later, hours, Jenna found herself on her knees, tears streaming down her face. Rivera was beside her, also crying, and several of the technicians had collapsed entirely, overwhelmed by whatever they'd been shown. The spheres were descending back to the ocean, their formation breaking apart, and the entity, if that's what it had been, was dissipating like fog in sunlight. Within minutes, the ocean was dark again, the spheres gone, the acoustic sensors quiet. But nothing was the same. Nothing would ever be the same again. "We need to get this data to the proper authorities," Rivera said, her voice shaking as she tried to compose herself. "We need to know." Jenna stood up, wiping her eyes. "Don't you understand? There are no proper authorities for this. This isn't something governments can handle or militaries can fight. We saw it, Rivera. We saw what they were showing us. They're not aliens. They're not visitors. They've been here longer than we have, watching from the deeps, and they're trying to tell us something." "What? What are they trying to tell us?" Jenna looked out at the dark ocean, at the place where something ancient and patient lived in depths that would crush human bones to powder. That we're running out of time. That the things we've done to this planet have consequences we can't escape. And that when we're gone, they'll still be here, watching the next species rise and fall, just like they watched us. Rivera had no response to that. None of them did. They packed up their equipment in silence, and as dawn broke over the Pacific, Jenna returned to the lighthouse alone. She opened the log and began to write, describing everything they'd seen, everything she'd felt, everything that vision had revealed. And at the bottom of the entry she added one more line. "Officer Owen Kessler was right. They are waking up. The question is, why now? And what will happen when they're fully awake?" She closed the log and looked out at the ocean, which was calm and beautiful, and utterly indifferent to human concerns. Somewhere beneath those waves, in trenches and canyons that had never seen sunlight, things were stirring. Ancient things, patient things, things that had watched the dinosaurs come and go, that had seen continents drift and mountains rise and fall. And they were trying to communicate, through blue spheres that defied physics, through visions that shattered minds, through acoustic patterns that no human equipment could fully interpret. They were trying to tell humanity something crucial, something urgent. Jenna just hoped they would figure out what that message was before it was too late. Owen woke up on the 47th day. Not gradually, not with the slow return of consciousness that doctors had hoped for, but suddenly, violently, sitting bolt upright in his hospital bed at 2:47 a.m. and screaming words that weren't in any human language. The night nurse called Rivera immediately, who called Jenna, and by the time Jenna arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later, Owen was conscious but changed. His eyes, which had stared at nothing for weeks, now moved with purpose, but there was something wrong with the way they tracked movement, as if he was seeing more than what was physically present in the room. "It's almost complete," he said when he saw Jenna. His voice was hoarse from disuse, but underneath that was something else. An odd resonance that made the words feel like they were coming from somewhere far away. "The awakening, I've seen the whole cycle, Jenna, every iteration. They've been dormant for so long, but the oceans are changing. The temperature, the chemistry, the currents. It's triggering their revival. Who are they, Owen? Jenna sat down beside his bed, taking his hand. It was cold, much colder than it should have been. What did they show you? Owen turned to look at her, and for just a moment his eyes flashed that deep electric blue. They don't have a name. Not one we could pronounce or understand. They're older than names, older than language. They've been in the deep ocean since before complex life existed on land. They're the observers, the documentarians. They record everything that happens in the ocean, every species that evolves and goes extinct, every geological shift, every change in temperature and chemistry. Like some kind of archive? Rivera asked from the doorway, medical tablet in hand. A biological database? More than that. Owen's grip on Jenna's hand tightened. Their consciousness itself, distributed across millions of individual organisms. The spheres we see are just the surface manifestation, the parts that rise up to observe the air-breathing world. But the real entity, the real intelligence, exists in the deep ocean, spread across an area larger than a continent. It's been there for hundreds of millions of years, sleeping and waking in cycles that correspond to major geological events. He paused, swallowing hard, and Jenna could see tears forming in his eyes. And it's waking up now because it knows what's coming. It's trying to warn us, the only way it knows how, through visions, through shared consciousness, through showing us what it's seen in past extinction events. Warn us about what? Jenna whispered, though she already knew the answer. She'd seen it in the vision, felt it in the weight of geological time pressing down on her consciousness. The ocean is dying, Owen said simply. Not quickly, not all at once, but dying nonetheless. The chemistry is changing too fast for adaptation. The temperature is rising in ways that disrupt the currents. The acidification is dissolving the foundation of the food chain, and this entity, this consciousness that's been documenting ocean life for eons, is watching another extinction event unfold, the biggest one since the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. Rivera moved closer, her professional curiosity warring with obvious unease. How can you possibly know all this? What did they do to your brain? They didn't do anything to my brain. They shared it. Owen released Jenna's hand and touched his own temple. For a few seconds, or maybe it was years, time doesn't work the same way in that shared consciousness. I was part of them. I saw through millions of eyes spread across the ocean floor. I felt the currents like a blind person feels wind. I tasted the chemical composition of seawater across every depth and latitude, and I accessed memories that go back further than human civilization, further than human evolution. He looked at Rivera directly. You want to know why some people wake up and others don't? It's not random. It's about capacity, how much of that shared consciousness a human brain can process before breaking. I was lucky. Or maybe unlucky. I stayed conscious just long enough to translate what I was seeing into terms I could remember. Most people can't. Most people just see chaos and fragment. And what about the ones who never wake up? Jenna asked quietly. Owen's expression turned somber. They're still in there. Still part of the shared consciousness. The entity tried to return them, but they refused to leave. They saw what I saw, felt what I felt, and decided that existence was preferable to returning to individual, isolated human consciousness. They're still alive, technically, but they're not here anymore. They're in the deep ocean, experiencing reality in ways we can't imagine. The room fell silent, except for the beeping of medical monitors. Jenna thought about the vision she'd experienced during the mass manifestation of spheres, the overwhelming sense of deep time and humanity's brief flicker in the geological record. She thought about how easy it would be to just let go, to dissolve into that vast consciousness and stop carrying the weight of individual existence. "We need to tell people," Rivera said finally. "If this entity is trying to warn us about environmental collapse, they won't believe us," Owen interrupted. "You know they won't. We don't have proof, just testimony and some sensor readings that could be explained away. And even if they did believe us, what would they do? Stop polluting the oceans, reduce carbon emissions, restructure the entire global economy. People can't even agree that climate change is real, and you want to tell them that an ancient alien consciousness is warning us about mass extinction." He was right, and they all knew it. But Jenna thought about the lighthouse log, about generations of keepers documenting these phenomena, creating a historical record that couldn't be dismissed. "We document everything," she said firmly. "Every observation, every encounter, every piece of data we can gather. We create a record so comprehensive that future generations can't ignore it. And we keep watching. If the entity is waking up, if more spheres appear, more people have encounters, more people will end up like me," Owen said. "Or worse, trapped in their own minds, unable to communicate what they've seen. Is that what you want?" "I want to understand." Jenna stood up, pacing the small hospital room. "I want to know if there's any way to bridge the gap between human consciousness and whatever that entity is. Because maybe they're not just trying to warn us. Maybe they're trying to communicate something more. A solution. A way forward." Owen shook his head slowly. "You didn't see what I saw. There is no way forward, not for us. We're too young as a species, too primitive. The entity has watched civilizations rise and fall before. Not human civilizations, but other intelligent species that evolved in the ocean. They had millions of years to develop, to perfect their relationship with their environment. And even they went extinct eventually. What chance do we have? We've been around for a blink of an eye, and we've already poisoned the very thing that gave us life." "Then what's the point?" Rivera demanded. "If we're doomed anyway, why is the entity bothering to warn us?" Owen smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "Because that's what observers do. They document, they witness, and sometimes, when something particularly noteworthy is about to happen, they give the subjects a chance to understand what's coming. It's not mercy, it's not intervention, it's just observation taken to its logical extreme. They want us to know. They want us to see what they've seen. Whether we do anything with that knowledge is up to us." He lay back down, suddenly exhausted, and Jenna could see that whatever energy had allowed him to wake and speak was fading fast. "Go back to your lighthouse," he told her. "Keep watching, keep documenting. The spheres will come again. They're appearing more frequently now, not just here, but all along the coast. Other people are seeing them, having encounters. Some will wake up like me, others won't be so lucky." "And you?" Jenna asked. "What will you do?" "I don't know yet." Owen closed his eyes. "Part of me wants to go back out there, back to the water. The entity is still in my head, Jenna. I can feel it. It's like having access to a library that contains the complete history of the ocean. But I can't read most of the books, and the ones I can read are terrifying. I don't know if I want that knowledge. I don't know if anyone should want it." Jenna and Rivera left him to rest, and in the hospital hallway they stood together in silence for a long moment. Finally, Rivera spoke. "I'm going to continue my research. If more people are having encounters, I need to understand the neurological effects. Maybe I can develop treatments, ways to help people process what they're seeing without fragmenting. And if you can't, then at least I'll have tried. Rivera pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. I've been contacted by other doctors, other researchers who've encountered similar cases along the Pacific coast. We're organizing a conference next month, pooling our data. If this is really happening on a large scale, we need to coordinate our response. Jenna nodded, but her mind was already back at the lighthouse, thinking about the log, about the patterns she'd observed, about the questions that still had no answers. I'm going back. Owen's right. The spheres will come again, and when they do, I'll be there to document it. She drove through the pre-dawn darkness, watching the sky lighten over the ocean as she headed north on Highway 101. The drive gave her time to think about everything Owen had said, about ancient consciousness and extinction events and humanity's brief moment in the sun. It should have been depressing. It should have filled her with despair. But instead, she felt oddly energized. Yes, they were facing something vast and incomprehensible. Yes, the entity was warning them about environmental collapse on a scale that would make human civilization impossible to maintain. But knowledge was power, even terrible knowledge. Especially terrible knowledge. When she reached the lighthouse, she found someone waiting for her. A woman in her 60s, dressed in practical outdoor clothing, standing at the edge of the cliff and looking out at the ocean. She turned when she heard Jenna's car approach, and Jenna recognized her immediately from newspaper photos and marine biology conferences. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the researcher who'd documented acoustic anomalies in the Pacific for 3 decades. The one whose work had been dismissed by mainstream science as either fraud or delusion. The one who'd lost her academic position because she'd refused to stop talking about things that couldn't be explained. Ms. Rohrfield, Foster said as Jenna approached. I've been reading the reports. About Officer Kessler, about the mass manifestation 3 weeks ago. I think it's time we talked. I'm sorry, but I can't, Jenna started, but Foster cut her off. I know what you saw. I've seen them too. I've been seeing them for 30 years, documenting them, trying to understand them. And I've finally figured out what they are. Foster pulled out a weathered notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. They're not aliens. They're not supernatural. They're Earth's original intelligence, the consciousness that evolved in the ocean long before anything crawled onto land. Jenna stared at the notebook, seeing sketches of spheres, of formations, of things that looked like the entity she'd glimpsed during the mass manifestation. How long have you known? Known for certain. 5 years. Suspected for much longer than that. Foster opened the notebook to a page covered in acoustic waveform patterns. These are the songs they sing, the way they communicate across vast distances. I've been recording them, analyzing them, learning their language. And I've made some progress. Not much, but enough to understand the basics. What are they saying? Foster's expression turned grave. They're counting down. Every song, every manifestation, every sphere that appears. It's part of a countdown to something, I don't know what. A mass emergence, maybe. A final attempt at communication before they go back into dormancy. Or, she paused, seeming reluctant to continue. Or what? Or they're saying goodbye. Documenting the end of an era. The way you'd take photographs of a place you're about to leave forever. Foster closed her notebook. The ocean chemistry has changed more in the last 50 years than it did in the previous 10,000. If that continues, if we keep acidifying and warming the water, eventually it will become uninhabitable even for them. Even for an intelligence that survived every extinction event in Earth's history. Jenna felt something cold settle in her chest. So they're not just warning us. They're documenting their own potential extinction too. Maybe. Or maybe they're giving us one last chance to understand what we're destroying. Not just the fish and the coral and the whales, but something older and stranger and more important than we ever imagined. Foster looked out at the ocean, which was beginning to glow with early morning light. I came here because I believe the next major manifestation will happen at this lighthouse. The patterns all point to it, and when it does, I want to be here. I want to try something I've never tried before. What? I want to communicate back. Before Jenna could respond, her phone rang. It was Rivera, her voice urgent. Jenna, we're picking up the acoustic pattern, right now. Strongest signal we've ever recorded. It's not coming from one location, it's coming from everywhere. The entire coast is lighting up. Jenna looked at Foster, who was already pulling equipment out of her car. Speakers, recorders, amplifiers. How long do we have? Based on previous patterns, maybe an hour before the spheres appear. But Jenna, this is different. This isn't like the other manifestations. The signal strength suggests... Rivera paused, and Jenna could hear the fear in her voice. It suggests they're all coming up. Not just a few spheres, but the whole entity. Everything that's been sleeping in the deep ocean for millions of years. Jenna's hands started shaking. I'll call you back. She helped Foster set up her equipment, working quickly and efficiently as the sun rose higher over the Pacific. They positioned speakers at the cliff edge, aimed down toward the water. Foster had recordings of the acoustic patterns, digitally enhanced and translated into frequencies that human equipment could produce. This is insane, Jenna said as they worked. We don't even know if this will work. We don't know if they'll understand. They'll understand. Foster's conviction was absolute. They've been listening to us for as long as we've been making sound. They understand our languages, our music, our machines. The question is whether they'll respond, and whether we'll be able to process that response without ending up like your friend Owen. By the time they finished setting up, other people had arrived. Rivera and her medical team, setting up monitors and cameras. A few fishermen who'd seen the spheres before and wanted to witness what they suspected would be a historic event. Even a local news crew, though Jenna doubted their equipment would be able to capture what was about to happen. The ocean was perfectly calm. No wind, no waves, just an endless mirror reflecting the morning sky. And beneath that surface, something was rising. It started with the water itself changing color, deepening from blue-green to that electric blue that Jenna had learned to associate with the spheres. But this time it wasn't isolated patches. The entire visible ocean, from the cliff base to the horizon, began to glow. It's starting, Rivera said unnecessarily, her voice barely a whisper. Spheres emerged from the water by the hundreds, by the thousands. They rose into the air in formations so complex that looking at them made Jenna dizzy. And behind them, through them, between them, that same flowing presence she'd glimpsed before began to manifest. The ocean given form. Consciousness made visible. Foster activated her equipment, and sound poured out across the water. The acoustic patterns the entity used to communicate, but modified, enhanced, turned into something that might be interpretable as a human attempt at their language. It was the equivalent of a child's first words, clumsy and probably grammatically incorrect. But it was communication. The spheres stopped moving. All of them simultaneously. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the entity, Jenna still had no better word for it, began to shift, to flow, to rearrange itself into something that might have been a response or might have been the equivalent of turning to look at who had spoken. And then the singing started. Not the overwhelming multi-frequency assault from before, but something gentler. Something that felt like it was trying to match Foster's attempt at communication, trying to find a middle ground between human and oceanic consciousness. Jenna felt the pressure in her skull again, but this time it didn't hurt. Images formed in her mind, clearer and more controlled than the chaotic vision she'd experienced before. She saw the ocean as the entity saw it. A vast, interconnected ecosystem, every organism linked to every other through currents and chemistry and something else, something that might have been a form of consciousness too distributed to comprehend. She saw the changes happening, warming water disrupting the deep currents, acidification dissolving the shells of tiny organisms that formed the base of the food chain, oxygen levels dropping in the deep ocean, dead zones expanding, the slow, inexorable collapse of systems that had been stable for millions of years. But she also saw something else. Resilience, adaptation, life finding a way, even in changing conditions. Not the same life, not the same ecosystem, but life nonetheless. The ocean wouldn't die, it would transform. The question was whether humanity would survive that transformation, and whether the entity itself would survive. The vision shifted, and Jenna saw the entity as it had been millions of years ago. Smaller, simpler, just beginning to develop the distributed consciousness that would eventually span the ocean floor. She saw it grow, evolve, learn to document and remember and understand. She saw other intelligences in the ocean, species that had evolved complex societies and then gone extinct, and she saw how the entity had preserved knowledge of them, keeping their memory alive long after their physical forms had dissolved back into the chemical soup of the sea. And she understood. This was what the entity was offering. Not salvation, not rescue, not even solutions, just memory. The promise that when humanity was gone, something would remember that we'd been here. Something would preserve our knowledge, our art, our science, our hopes and fears and dreams. We would become part of the archive, just another species that had briefly flourished and then failed. It should have been terrifying. It should have been the ultimate existential horror. But instead, Jenna felt oddly comforted. Even if humanity destroyed itself, even if we poisoned the ocean beyond recognition, even if we triggered a mass extinction that wiped out half the species on Earth, we wouldn't be truly gone. We would live on in the memory of something ancient and patient, and fundamentally different from ourselves. The vision faded, and Jenna found herself back in her own body, tears streaming down her face. Foster was beside her, also crying, and Rivera and the fishermen and the news crew. Everyone who'd been present for the manifestation had received the same message, the same offer of preservation and memory. The spheres began to descend back to the water, their formations breaking apart, and the flowing entity dissipated like morning mist. Within minutes, the ocean was dark again, returning to its normal blue-green color. But something fundamental had changed. They'd communicated. For the first time in human history, as far as Jenna knew, humans had successfully exchanged information with a non-human intelligence, and both sides had understood. "Did you record it?" Jenna asked Foster hoarsely. Foster nodded, checking her equipment. "Everything. Audio, video, sensor readings. But Jenna, I don't think the recordings will show what we experienced. The real communication was happening at a level that technology can't capture. All we'll have is documentation of the attempt and personal testimony about what we felt. Then we write it down. All of it, every detail." Jenna thought about the lighthouse log, about the tradition of documentation that stretched back decades. This is too important to lose. Future generations need to know that this happened. They need to know that we tried, that we made contact, that we understood. She spent the rest of that day writing, filling page after page of the lighthouse log with everything she'd seen and felt. Rivera and her team did the same with their equipment, creating the most comprehensive documentation of a paranormal event in human history. Foster analyzed her recordings, isolating the frequencies and patterns that seemed to generate responses from the entity. And Owen, still in his hospital bed, but somehow aware of what had happened, called Jenna that evening. "You did it," he said simply. "You made them understand that we're trying, that some of us care." "Will they come back?" Jenna asked. "They never left. They're still down there, in the deep ocean, watching and documenting. But yes, the spheres will manifest again. More often, probably. Now that they know we can communicate, even crudely, they'll try to share more. To teach us, if we're capable of learning. And if we're not, if we can't understand fast enough?" Owen was quiet for a long moment. "Then they'll be sad, in whatever way a distributed consciousness experiences sadness. They'll document our failure and extinction, preserve our memory, and wait for the next intelligent species to evolve. Maybe in another 50 million years, maybe longer." After they hung up, Jenna went outside and stood at the edge of the cliff, looking out at the dark ocean. The lighthouse beam swept across the water in its endless rotation, and somewhere beneath those waves, something ancient was watching. Remembering. Waiting. She thought about the message Foster had been trying to decode, the countdown embedded in the entity's songs. Maybe it wasn't a countdown to their departure or dormancy. Maybe it was a countdown to something else, to the point of no return, beyond which the ocean's chemistry would change so fundamentally that even distributed consciousness couldn't adapt. Or maybe it was a countdown to hope, to the moment when humanity would finally understand what it was destroying and choose to change course. The entity had survived every extinction event in Earth's history. Maybe it knew something about resilience that humans had yet to learn. Jenna returned to the lighthouse and opened the log one more time. At the bottom of the day's entry, she added a final line. "Today we made contact with something older than our species, and it offered us a gift. Memory. The question now is, what we'll do with the time we have left? Will we earn the preservation they offer? Or will we simply be another failed experiment documented in an alien archive? The choice is ours. It always has been." She closed the log and looked around the lighthouse observation room. This structure would stand for decades, maybe centuries. But the entity beneath the ocean would still be here long after the lighthouse crumbled to dust, after the cliffs eroded into the sea, after every human artifact had been swallowed by time. And that was okay. That was the way things had always been. Humanity was just one chapter in a book with millions of pages, and perhaps the kindest thing a species could hope for was that someone would read their chapter and remember. The lighthouse beam continued its rotation, cutting through the darkness, while below, in depths beyond human comprehension, something ancient smiled. Or did whatever passed for smiling in a consciousness distributed across a million individual organisms, and continued its eternal vigil. The blue spheres would return. They always did. And Jenna would be here to watch them, to document them, to try to understand the message they carried from the depths. Because that's what observers do. They witness, they record. They keep faith with the ancient duty of remembering, even when what they remember is the story of their own species' final days. The ocean keeps its secrets well, and sometimes those secrets shine up from depths we were never meant to explore. Tonight, we have the story of Clint Marison and Riley Danvers, two people who discovered that not all lights beneath the waves belong to this world. So, get ready, because it's time to let the darkness take control. Clint Marison had been running coastal patrols for the Oregon Marine Board for 11 years, and he thought he'd seen everything the Pacific could throw at him. Smugglers, capsized boats, drunk fishermen who'd gone out too far and couldn't find their way back. Bodies sometimes when the ocean decided to give up what it had taken. But in all those years of night patrols along the stretch of coast between Lincoln City and Depot Bay, he'd never seen anything that made him question reality itself. That changed on October the 3rd, 2021. It was a Thursday night, the kind where fog rolled in so thick you could barely see 10 feet in front of your boat. The kind of night when smart people stayed on land and let the ocean do whatever the ocean wanted to do. But Clint's patrol route didn't care about fog or common sense, and the Marine Board had received reports of possible illegal crab pot theft in the area, so out he went. His patrol boat, a 23-foot Boston whaler with a spotlight mounted on the bow, cut through the fog at reduced speed. The visibility was terrible. The spotlight just reflected back at him, turning the fog into a wall of white that made navigation almost impossible. He was relying entirely on his GPS and his knowledge of the coastline, moving slowly enough that he could stop if anything unexpected appeared in his path. It was 11:47 p.m. when he first saw it. At first, he thought it was another boat, maybe one of the crab pot thieves he was looking for. There was a glow beneath the water, off to his starboard side, maybe 50 yards away. Blue light, bright enough to be visible even through the fog and the dark water. But as Clint slowed his boat and turned toward it, he realized the light wasn't moving like a boat's running lights would. It was stationary, hovering at what looked like 15 or 20 feet below the surface. He killed his engine and let the boat drift, watching. The light pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. And here's the thing that made Clint's skin crawl. The light didn't illuminate the water around it. When you shine a light underwater, even a weak one, you see particles. You see the water itself becoming visible. But this light just existed, a sphere of blue glow that seemed to push the darkness aside without actually interacting with anything. Clint grabbed his radio, intending to report it, but static was all he got. That wasn't unusual in heavy fog, but it added to the growing sense of wrongness that was settling over him like a cold blanket. He tried his cell phone. No signal. Also, not unusual this far from shore, but the timing felt deliberate somehow, as if something didn't want him calling for help. He watched the light for maybe 3 minutes, his boat rocking gently on the calm water. The fog swirled around him, creating shapes that weren't quite there, shadows that moved at the edge of his vision. And then the light began to rise. It came up slowly, maintaining that same steady pulse. 20 feet deep. 15, 10. Clint found himself holding his breath, his hand hovering over the ignition key, ready to start the engine and get the hell out of there if necessary. But he didn't. He watched, transfixed, as the light rose to within 5 feet of the surface, and stopped. It hung there just below the surface, and Clint could see now that it was perfectly spherical, maybe 3 feet in diameter. The blue glow was coming from inside it, not from its surface, as if the sphere itself was made of blue light somehow made solid. He leaned over the side of his boat, trying to get a better look, and that's when he noticed something that made his heart hammer against his ribs. His own shadow, cast by the boat's running lights, was falling across the water. But the blue sphere, bright as it was, wasn't casting any shadow at all. The light from it just stopped at the edges of the sphere itself, refusing to extend into the surrounding water. Clint pulled back from the edge, his rational mind trying to find an explanation. Some kind of bioluminescent organism? But no fish or jellyfish glowed like that, with that perfect geometric shape and that steady mechanical pulse. A submerged buoy with a light? But why would it be moving, rising toward the surface like something alive and curious? He was still trying to rationalize it when the sphere began to move horizontally, gliding through the water with no visible means of propulsion. It circled his boat once, staying at that constant depth of 5 feet, and then moved away to the north, following the coastline. Clint watched it go, the blue glow fading into the fog and darkness, and only then did he realize he'd been gripping the side of his boat so hard that his hands ached. He started his engine with shaking hands and continued his patrol, but his mind wasn't on illegal crab pots anymore. He kept looking over his shoulder, scanning the water, expecting to see that blue glow reappear at any moment. It didn't. The rest of the night was quiet, almost eerily so. No other boats, no sounds except the gentle lap of waves against his hull and the distant calls of seabirds settling in for the night. When he got back to the marina at 4 a.m., he wrote up his patrol report and left out the part about the blue sphere. What would he say? That he'd seen an unexplained light under the water? They'd think he'd been drinking, or worse, that he was losing his nerve. After 11 years of night patrols, the last thing he needed was people questioning his reliability. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next 3 days, he found himself researching bioluminescence, underwater drones, experimental military technology, anything that might explain what he'd seen. Nothing fit. Bioluminescent organisms didn't maintain perfect geometric shapes. Drones made noise and had visible propulsion systems, and if the military was testing something in civilian fishing waters without any kind of warning or security perimeter, someone would have heard about it. On the 4th night, he went back out on patrol, following the same route, same time, around midnight. The fog was lighter this time, visibility maybe 30 feet, and when he reached the area where he'd seen the sphere, he cut his engine and waited. 20 minutes passed. Nothing. Just the gentle rocking of his boat and the sound of water against the hull. Clint was about to give up and continue his patrol when he saw it again. Not in the same spot, but further south, closer to shore. The blue glow beneath the water, pulsing with that same steady rhythm. This time, he was ready. He'd brought his underwater camera, the kind he used to document environmental violations and underwater hazards. He mounted it on a pole, turned it on, and lowered it into the water, aiming it in the direction of the glow. The camera's screen showed nothing but darkness and particles. The sphere, clearly visible to his naked eye as a source of blue light maybe 40 yards away, wasn't showing up on the camera at all. Clint adjusted the camera's settings, checked the connections, lowered it deeper. Still nothing. The sphere was there, he could see it, but the camera couldn't capture it. That's when he heard the radio crackle to life. Not words exactly, but something that might have been words filtered through layers of static and distortion. It sounded almost like singing, a melody that rose and fell in patterns that felt familiar even though he'd never heard them before. The sound made his teeth ache and his skull throb, and he reached over to turn the radio off. But he hadn't turned it on. It shouldn't have been making any sound at all. The singing continued for maybe 15 seconds, and then cut off abruptly. In the sudden silence, Clint became aware that the ocean had gone completely still. No waves, no movement, just flat calm that extended in every direction. And the blue sphere was rising again, coming toward the surface, coming toward his boat. This time, Clint started his engine. He didn't wait to see what would happen. He just opened the throttle and headed back toward the shore, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds to see if the sphere was following him. It wasn't. It stayed where it was, hovering just below the surface, pulsing with that steady blue light, and as Clint's boat disappeared into the fog, he could have sworn he saw other lights beginning to appear around it. Smaller ones, dozens of them, rising from the deep like stars in reverse. The next morning, he called Riley Danvers. Riley was a commercial diver who worked out of Newport, doing hull inspections, underwater repairs, anything that required someone to go down and work in cold, dark water, where most people wouldn't last 5 minutes. Clint had known her for years. had pulled her out of the water during a few emergencies and trusted her judgment more than most people's. They met at a coffee shop in Lincoln City, and Clint told her everything. The blue sphere, the way it didn't show up on camera, the strange singing from the radio, the way the ocean had gone completely still. He expected her to laugh it off or suggest he take some time off. Instead, she pulled out her phone and showed him a photograph. It was a screenshot from a marine biology forum, a discussion thread about unexplained phenomena in the Pacific. There were dozens of posts from fishermen, divers, Coast Guard personnel, all describing similar experiences. Blue lights beneath the water. Lights that didn't illuminate their surroundings. Lights that appeared during calm conditions and disappeared when approached. The thread had been active for years, but no one had any explanations, just more sightings and more questions. "I've seen them too," Riley said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. 3 times in the past 2 years. Once during a night dive off Yakina Head, and twice from my boat. They're real, Clint. I don't know what they are, but they're real, and they're becoming more common. 5 years ago, there were maybe 2 or 3 posts a month on that forum. Now, there are 2 or 3 posts a week. "What do you think they are?" Clint asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Riley shook her head. "I don't know, but I want to find out, and I think the only way to do that is to go down there, to actually dive to one of these lights and see what we're dealing with." Clint stared at her. "That's insane. We don't know what these things are. They could be dangerous. They could be, or they could be completely harmless. But either way, we can't understand them from the surface. Someone needs to get close, and I'm probably one of the few people along this coast with the experience and equipment to do it safely." Riley leaned forward, her expression intense. "Look, I know it sounds crazy, but think about what we're talking about here. If these are some kind of unknown phenomenon, some kind of life form or technology that science hasn't documented, we have a chance to be the first people to really study them. How often does that opportunity come along?" Clint wanted to say no. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to stay away from the blue spheres, to let someone else deal with whatever they were. But Riley was right. Someone needed to investigate, and if not them, then who? The military, who would classify everything and bury it. Some corporation looking to exploit whatever they found. At least, if they documented it themselves, they could control what happened with the information. "If we do this," Clint said slowly, "we do it carefully. We plan it out, we have backup systems. We don't take any unnecessary risks. And if anything seems dangerous, we abort immediately. Agreed?" "Agreed." Riley smiled, but there was an edge of fear beneath it. She was as scared as he was, Clint realized. She was just better at hiding it. They spent the next week preparing. Riley checked and double-checked her diving equipment, tested her backup regulators, made sure her underwater lights were fully charged. Clint plotted out the locations where he'd seen the spheres, looking for patterns. Both sightings had been in relatively shallow water, 30 to 50 feet deep, over rocky bottom. Both had occurred between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Both had been during periods of unusual calm. They decided to make their attempt on October 14th, a Tuesday night when the weather forecast called for light winds and calm seas. Clint would take his patrol boat to the location of his second sighting, the one where he'd seen multiple lights appearing. Riley would dive with a full tank of air, underwater cameras mounted on her helmet and chest, and a safety line attached to the boat. If anything went wrong, Clint could pull her up immediately. The night of the 14th arrived with perfect conditions, no fog, just a clear dark sky with stars visible from horizon to horizon. The ocean was glassy calm, barely a ripple disturbing the surface. It was the kind of night that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. Instead, it felt ominous, like the calm before a storm that weather forecasts couldn't predict. They reached the location around 11:30 p.m. Clint shut down the engine and deployed the sea anchor to keep the boat from drifting. Riley suited up, checking her equipment one final time while Clint watched the water, looking for any sign of the blue glow. "You don't have to do this," Clint said as Riley prepared to enter the water. "We can just observe from the surface." "We've been observing from the surface," Riley pointed out. "It hasn't gotten us anywhere. If these things only appear at night, if they stay underwater, then the only way to really see them is to go down there." She adjusted her mask. "Besides, I'm curious now. I need to know what they are." She rolled backward off the boat, and Clint heard the splash as she hit the water. Her lights came on immediately, two bright beams cutting through the darkness beneath the surface. Through the clear water, he could see her descending, following the safety line down toward the rocky bottom 40 feet below. Clint watched her lights get dimmer as she descended, and he kept his eyes on the surrounding water, looking for any sign of the blue glow. Nothing yet, just darkness and Riley's lights and the gentle rocking of the boat. Then his radio crackled. Not the singing this time, but Riley's voice, distorted by static but understandable. "I'm at the bottom. Rocky substrate, some kelp. No sign of any unusual lights. Visibility is decent, maybe 20 feet. "Copy that," Clint responded. "I don't see anything from up here either. Maybe they won't show up tonight." "Give it time. You said they didn't appear immediately the second time either." So they waited. Riley explored the bottom, her lights sweeping back and forth, while Clint kept watch from the surface. 5 minutes passed. 10. Clint was starting to think the whole expedition had been a waste of time when he saw it. The blue glow, appearing not from the direction where Riley was diving, but from much deeper water to the north. It looked exactly like the previous sightings, a perfect sphere of blue light that didn't illuminate its surroundings, pulsing with that steady, rhythmic beat. "Riley, I've got visual on a sphere," Clint said into the radio. "North of your position. Looks like it's at about 60 feet depth. Do you see it?" Static, then Riley's voice confused. "Negative. I don't see anything. My lights are working fine, visibility hasn't changed. Where exactly are you seeing it?" Clint gave her the direction and approximate distance. Through the clear water, he could see Riley's lights turning, pointing in the direction he'd indicated. But her voice came back puzzled. "Clint, there's nothing here. Just dark water and some rock formations." "Are you sure?" "I'm looking right at it," Clint insisted. "Blue sphere, maybe 3 feet across, 60 feet down. How can you not see it?" "I'm telling you, there's nothing here. I'm pointing my lights exactly where you said, and I'm seeing normal ocean bottom. Maybe it's deeper than you think, or further away." But it wasn't. Clint could see it clearly, could see Riley's lights sweeping back and forth in the water, passing right through where the sphere should be. It was as if they existed in different realities, as if the sphere was visible from the surface but invisible below the water, or visible to him, but not to her. Then the sphere began to rise, moving toward Riley's position, and Clint felt ice form in his stomach. "Riley, it's moving toward you. It's rising. You need to see it. It's right there." "Clint, I don't see anything." Riley's voice had an edge of fear now. "There's nothing here but water and rocks. What are you seeing?" The sphere reached Riley's depth, maybe 10 feet away from her, and still her light swept through the space it occupied as if it wasn't there at all. Clint grabbed the safety line, ready to haul her up if necessary, and that's when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Riley's shadow, cast by her underwater lights against the rocky bottom, was behaving strangely. It flickered and jumped, as if something was passing between her and her light sources. But there was nothing there, nothing visible to either of them. Just that sphere that only Clint could see, hovering near Riley while she remained completely unaware of its presence. "Riley, come up! Come up now!" Clint's voice was urgent, tight with fear. "What? Why? I'm fine, there's nothing. I don't care. Come up, right now." Maybe it was the tone of his voice, or maybe Riley trusted his judgment enough not to argue. Either way, she started ascending, following the safety line back toward the boat. And as she rose, the sphere followed her. It stayed about 10 feet away, maintaining that distance, pulsing with its blue light that she couldn't see and Clint couldn't look away from. Riley broke the surface, and Clint helped her back into the boat, both of them working quickly, efficiently. Only when she was aboard and had removed her mask did Clint point at the water. "It's right there, right next to the boat. You're telling me you can't see that?" Riley looked where he was pointing, and her expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Clint, there's nothing there. The water is clear, I can see the bottom, but there's no blue light, no sphere, nothing unusual at all." They stared at each other, the implications slowly sinking in. The sphere was visible from the surface but not from underwater. Or it was visible to Clint, but not to Riley. Or something else was happening. Something that didn't make sense according to any physical laws they understood. "Check your camera footage," Clint said. "Maybe it recorded something even if you couldn't see it with your eyes." Riley pulled out the SD cards from her helmet and chest cameras and inserted one into her waterproof tablet. They watched the footage together, seeing exactly what Riley had described. Dark water, rocky bottom, kelp swaying in the current, her lights sweeping back and forth. When they reached the timestamp where Clint had seen the sphere approach, there was nothing. No blue light, no distortion, nothing except Riley's lights and the normal underwater environment. "This doesn't make sense," Riley said quietly. "If it's there, if it's real, the cameras should have picked it up. Even if I couldn't see it with my eyes, the cameras should have recorded it." "Unless it's not there in any normal sense," Clint suggested. "Unless it exists in some way that cameras can't capture and divers can't see, but people on the surface can observe, or..." He paused, a disturbing thought occurring to him. "Or unless I'm the only one who can see it. Unless there's something wrong with my perception." Riley checked her watch, and her expression changed. "Clint, what time do you have?" He looked at his own watch. 12:17 a.m. That's wrong. We entered the water at 11:43. I was down there for 18 minutes before you told me to come up. We spent maybe 5 minutes getting me back in the boat and another 3 looking at the camera footage. It should be 12:09 at the latest. My watch says 12:06. They compared their watches. His showed 12:17. Hers showed 12:06. 11 minutes difference, and both of them had synchronized their watches before the dive to ensure accurate timing. "Check your phone," Riley said, pulling out her own. Clint grabbed his phone from the waterproof case. The time display showed 12:17 a.m., but when he opened the clock app to check against network time, it immediately adjusted itself. 12:06 a.m. His watch had somehow gained 11 minutes, or network time had somehow lost 11 minutes, or something had happened during the dive that affected the flow of time in ways that made no sense at all. "This is getting worse," Riley said, her voice shaking slightly. "We came out here looking for an explanation, and instead we're finding more questions. Lights that only some people can see, time discrepancies. What are we dealing with here?" Before Clint could answer, the blue sphere, which had been hovering near the boat, suddenly dimmed. Not disappearing, but fading, and as it did, Clint became aware of other lights appearing in the water around them. Not the bright blue of the first sphere, but softer, smaller points of light, scattered across a wide area. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, like a constellation had fallen into the ocean. "Do you see those?" Clint whispered, afraid that Riley would say no, that he was hallucinating or losing his mind. But Riley was staring at the water, her eyes wide. "I see them. Oh God, I see them now. What are they? Why can I see these but not the big one?" The smaller lights began to pulse in sequence, creating waves of light that rippled across the water's surface. And with each pulse, Clint felt something in his chest, like his heartbeat was trying to synchronize with the rhythm of the lights. He put his hand over his heart, feeling it hammer irregularly, and beside him, Riley did the same thing. "Start the engine," Riley said urgently. "Clint, start the engine and get us out of here." He did, fumbling with the ignition key, and the engine roared to life. As soon as it did, the lights vanished. All of them, simultaneously, as if the sound of the engine had broken whatever spell they'd been under. The ocean returned to normal darkness, and Clint could hear his own ragged breathing and Riley's frightened gasps. They headed back to shore in silence, neither of them willing to talk about what they'd just experienced. Only when they were safely tied up at the marina, with solid ground beneath their feet and the lights of the civilization around them, did Riley finally speak. "My watch," she said, looking at her wrist. "It's moving backward." Clint looked at her watch face. The second hand was ticking in reverse, moving counterclockwise, and as they watched, the minute hand began to follow. 12:47 a.m. became 12:46, became 12:45, the time flowing backward like a video in rewind. Then it stopped, the hands frozen at 12:43 a.m., exactly when Riley had entered the water. "What does this mean?" Riley's voice was barely audible. "What did we encounter out there?" Clint had no answer. He looked out at the dark ocean, at the horizon where water met sky, and somewhere out there beneath the waves, something ancient and incomprehensible was watching them, learning from them, maybe warning them, or maybe just documenting them the way humans might document an interesting species of fish. Whatever it was, Clint knew one thing with certainty. They'd stumbled onto something far bigger than unexplained lights in the water. They'd found a phenomenon that could manipulate perception, affect electronic devices, and somehow alter the flow of time itself. And it was still out there, pulsing with blue light in the depths, waiting for the next curious humans to come looking for answers they might not be ready to find. The next morning, Riley's watch was still frozen at 12:43 a.m. 2 repair shops confirmed nothing was mechanically wrong. It just wouldn't move, as if time had stopped for that device at the moment she entered the water. Clint's watch had corrected itself by dawn, but he couldn't forget those 11 missing minutes. 3 days later, they met at Riley's apartment in Newport. She'd been researching similar experiences along the coast. "There are patterns," she said, spreading a map across her kitchen table with dozens of pins marking sighting locations. They cluster around 3 areas: Tillamook Head, Yaquina Head, and Heceta Head, all near deep water where the continental shelf drops quickly. She pulled up graphs on her laptop. The sightings correlate with increased seismic activity. Small offshore earthquakes, magnitude 2.0 to 4.0. When seismic activity increases, sightings increase. What could cause both? Clint asked. I talked to a geologist who mentioned earthquake lights, a real phenomenon where people see strange lights before earthquakes, often blue spheres. The theory involves piezoelectric effects from stressed rocks. So these could be natural? Maybe, but that doesn't explain the time discrepancies. Natural phenomena don't stop watches or create missing minutes. Unless these spheres create localized space-time distortions, Clint suggested. That would require enormous energy, unless what we're seeing is just a small part of something much larger. The implications hung heavy between them. "I want to try again," Riley said. "But with more equipment. Electromagnetic sensors, better cameras. If we can't measure them, that's data too, a phenomenon that evades technological detection." Despite his reservations, Clint agreed. But they needed help and better protocols. Over the next week, they assembled a team. Marcus Torres, a former Navy sonar technician with high-end acoustic equipment, and Dr. Sarah Nakamura, a physicist specializing in electromagnetic phenomena. Both were intrigued enough to volunteer. They planned for October 23rd with comprehensive monitoring, acoustic sensors at multiple depths, electromagnetic field detectors, 2 divers with multiple cameras, and Nakamura on a second boat ready to call for emergency help. The night arrived cold and clear. After deploying sensors and checking equipment, Clint and Riley entered the water at 10:30 p.m., descending to 40 feet. "Anything on the sensors?" Clint asked, after 15 minutes of normal diving. "Negative," Marcus responded. "Just normal ocean sounds." Then Riley grabbed his arm, pointing upward. The blue glow was descending from above. "I can see it this time," Riley said, her voice tight. "It's coming from the surface." The sphere stopped 10 feet away, pulsing steadily. Details became visible. The light came from inside it, patterns swirling in complex formations. "Getting unusual electromagnetic readings," Nakamura reported. "Field strength increasing. Acoustic sensors picking up low-frequency pulses," Marcus added. "Too regular to be natural." 2 more spheres rose from below, forming a triangle with the divers at the center. They pulsed in sequence. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Clint felt pressure in his chest, his heartbeat synchronizing with the sphere's rhythm. "Electromagnetic readings spiking," Nakamura said, worried. "The field is affecting my instruments." The spheres began rotating around them. Clint's sense of direction dissolved. His heart hammered faster than should be possible. "We need to surface now," Riley said, her voice strained. They ascended, spheres following, and broke the surface gasping. Only out of the water did their heart rates normalize. "The electromagnetic pulse frequency matches human cardiac rhythm," Nakamura said over the radio, her voice filled with disbelief. "Whatever those spheres are, they're generating a field specifically tuned to human biology." "How would they know that?" Riley demanded. No one had an answer. "Check your watches," Riley said. Clint's showed 1:23 a.m. His phone showed 1:09 a.m., 14 minutes difference. Riley's watch was frozen again at 10:43 p.m. Marcus's equipment showed completely different timestamps. "This is getting worse," Riley whispered. They documented everything, made a pact to continue investigating privately, and over 2 weeks conducted 3 more dives. The spheres grew bolder, approaching closer, staying longer. Time distortions intensified. Riley's watch stopped working entirely. Clint's gained 30 minutes. Marcus's equipment recorded timestamps hours off reality. Then, on November 7th, the Mary Catherine disappeared. The fishing boat vanished from radar off Yakina Head, the same area where they'd been diving. When search boats arrived, Clint saw the water glowing with diffuse blue light covering an area the size of football fields. His sonar showed something massive beneath the surface, extending deeper than his equipment could measure. "All boats stay clear," the Coast Guard commander ordered. "We're calling Navy support." But if the crew was alive, they were running out of time. Clint called Riley. Riley arrived within 40 minutes, equipment loaded. Marcus and Dr. Nakamura came too, understanding without being told this was connected to their investigation. "You don't have to do this," Clint said as Riley suited up. "The Coast Guard has divers. By the time they organize a team, anyone down there will be dead," Riley interrupted. "Conventional divers won't know what they're dealing with. I do." Clint looked at the glowing water, now visible even in daylight. "I'm coming with you." They geared up quickly, while Nakamura deployed sensors and Marcus set up acoustic equipment. "Your electromagnetic exposure will be high," Nakamura warned. "Any disorientation, nausea, come up immediately." The water felt different, thicker, resisting movement unnaturally. Blue glow surrounded them from all directions, turning the ocean into a luminous void. At 60 feet, they found the Mary Catherine resting on the bottom, apparently undamaged. But the crew was gone, cabin doors hanging open. Riley grabbed Clint's arm and pointed down. Below the boat was an opening in the ocean floor, impossibly regular, like an engineered shaft descending into darkness. "That's not natural," Nakamura's voice crackled. "That's deliberately created." The blue glow came from inside the shaft. "Acoustic sensors picking up sounds from inside," Marcus reported. "Not mechanical, not organic, like data transmission underwater." "The crew went down there," Riley said. "We need to follow." Every safety protocol screamed at Clint to refuse. But she was right. 5 minutes, he said. "Then we surface regardless." They entered the shaft, descending into intensifying blue light. The walls were smooth, glassy, covered in shifting mathematical patterns that hurt to look at. After 50 feet, the shaft opened into a spherical chamber 30 feet across. Floating in the center, suspended in blue glow, were the 5 crew members of the Mary Catherine. They weren't drowning. Somehow, they were breathing without equipment, chests rising and falling normally, faces peaceful as if sleeping. Their arrangement was deliberate, a circle with heads pointing inward. "How are they breathing?" Riley whispered. Clint didn't know. The chamber was full of water, yet they lived. Physics had been suspended here. Then he noticed their skin had a faint blue tinge, and their shadows moved independently, shapes that hurt to perceive. "We need to get them out," Clint said, swimming toward the nearest crew member. The moment he touched the man's shoulder, the chamber transformed. Blue light intensified, and pressure flooded Clint's mind, information pushing into his brain faster than he could process. Images cascaded, the ocean, billions of years ago. First organisms forming, evolution's march, species rising and falling, and beneath it all, something conscious, watching since the beginning. He understood what the spheres were. Not objects, but nodes in a vast network of consciousness throughout the ocean, maybe the entire planet. The blue light wasn't illumination. It was thought made visible, communication between parts of a distributed intelligence humans couldn't fully comprehend. The crew wasn't imprisoned. They were being studied. The intelligence wanted to understand human consciousness, treating them with the same respectful curiosity marine biologists show rare deep-sea species. The vision faded. Beside him, Riley had experienced the same thing. He saw it in her wide eyes. "They're safe," Riley said. "The intelligence is protecting them." "But we have to get them out," Clint insisted. As if responding, the blue light pulsed, and the crew began waking. Their eyes opened simultaneously, glowing briefly with blue light before fading to normal. They were confused, but unharmed. Getting 5 disoriented people up 60 feet should have been impossible. Not enough air, equipment, or time. But the same force keeping them alive helped them ascend. Water pushed them upward. Air supplies lasted impossibly long. Time stretched to give them what they needed. They emerged into afternoon sun. Coast Guard boats immediately surrounded them, pulling the crew aboard, checking vitals. Everyone was in perfect health, better than perfect. Old injuries had healed, chronic conditions improved. The blue glow faded from the water within minutes, and the shaft vanished as if it never existed. The crew remembered only peace and floating, understanding something profound they couldn't articulate. The Navy investigated, found nothing, closed the case. Media reported the rescue, but moved on when no dramatic explanation emerged. Only Clint, Riley, Marcus, and Nakamura knew the truth. The patterns we saw were communication attempts, Nakamura said during a later meeting. The intelligence was trying to teach us, but our brains couldn't process it fast enough. Or we weren't ready, Riley suggested. Maybe human consciousness is too limited. We experience time linearly. What if this intelligence sees all moments simultaneously? That would explain the time distortions. Being near something existing outside normal time naturally created temporal inconsistencies. Clint's watch stopped completely on December 1st, freezing at 12:43 a.m., the same time Riley's had stopped. The repair shop found nothing wrong. Riley's watch started working again but ran backward now, hands moving counterclockwise. She wore it anyway, finding it appropriate to carry a timepiece flowing opposite to normal reality. They continued their patrols. The spheres appeared less frequently after the Mary Catherine incident, as if the intelligence had learned what it needed. But they still appeared occasionally, still pulsed with light that didn't illuminate, still created zones where reality bent. Once, in mid-December, Clint saw dozens of spheres rise simultaneously, arranging themselves into a human figure with outstretched arms, waving or beckoning. The intelligence was saying goodbye, or hello, or both at once. Clint waved back. The spheres maintained their formation for minutes, then sank into depths that might extend further than any human could measure. "It knows we're aware of it now," Riley said later. "We've established mutual recognition. What happens next is up to us. Do we keep studying it?" Riley looked at the ocean. "We keep watching, keep documenting, keep being respectful. We found something ancient and vast, here long before humans. The best we can do is learn what we can and trust that when we're ready, we'll understand more." Riley's backward watch became their mascot, the Oracle. They joked that when it ran forward again, the intelligence would be ready for more direct contact. Dr. Nakamura published a paper on unusual electromagnetic phenomena in coastal waters, largely ignored but creating interest among fringe researchers. Marcus built a database of sphere-associated sounds. Riley took up underwater photography, hoping to capture clear evidence. Clint kept patrolling, night after night. His official reports documented routine patrols. His personal log recorded everything, every sighting, every anomaly, every moment when reality bent around blue spheres. He kept his frozen watch as a reminder that time wasn't fixed, that consciousness existed in unimaginable forms, that the ocean held mysteries that might never be fully explained. Late at night, holding the watch, he'd think about those underwater moments when he'd connected to something vast and ancient. He'd glimpsed the universe from outside human perspective, and it had changed him. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, and beneath those waves, in depths where light shouldn't reach and physics shouldn't work as textbooks claimed, something blue and patient and infinitely curious continued its endless observations. The blue spheres would return, they always did, and Clint would be there to document them, to watch them, to maintain humanity's vigil over phenomena that defied explanation but demanded attention, because that's what observers do. They witness, they record, and they hope that someday the full picture becomes clear. Until then, the ocean keeps its secrets, and Clint keeps watching. Sometimes the most unsettling thing about the unknown isn't what we see, but what refuses to be documented. Tonight, we have the story of Nadia Lorne and Keegan Holt, two people who witnessed something that physics says shouldn't exist, and technology refuses to acknowledge. So get ready, because it's time to let the darkness take control. Nadia Lorne had been walking the Heseta Head trails for 3 years, ever since she'd moved to Florence, Oregon, to escape the noise and chaos of Portland. The lighthouse perched on the cliff was her favorite landmark, a white tower that had guided ships since 1894, standing solid against storms that would have demolished lesser structures. She walked these paths in all weather, rain, fog, wind, but she preferred the clear nights when the lighthouse beam swept across the dark Pacific, and you could see stars stretching to the horizon. October 12, 2022, was one of those clear nights. Nadia had finished her shift at the marine supply store and driven the winding road up to the lighthouse parking area just as dusk was settling into full darkness. The air was cold, sharp with salt, and the smell of kelp drying on rocks below. She zipped her jacket and started down the trail that hugged the cliff edge, her flashlight beam cutting through shadows cast by shore pine and spruce. The lighthouse beam swept past overhead, one rotation every 10 seconds, a rhythm she'd long since memorized. She'd walked maybe a quarter mile when she saw it. At first, she thought someone had dropped a camping lantern on the rocks below. There was a blue glow coming from the base of the cliff, steady and bright. But as she moved closer to the edge and looked down, she realized the light wasn't on the rocks at all. It was hovering above them, maybe 20 feet up from the surf, and it was perfectly spherical. Nadia stopped walking. Her hand tightened on the flashlight even though its beam seemed pale and useless compared to the blue glow emanating from the sphere. The thing was maybe 4 feet across, and the light coming from it had a quality she'd never seen before. It was bright enough that she should be able to see the rocks beneath it illuminated, but they remained in shadow. The light simply stopped at the edges of the sphere itself, refusing to extend outward. She stood there watching for maybe 2 minutes, her heart rate accelerating, when the sphere began to move. It drifted toward the cliff face, maintaining its height above the water, and as it got closer, Nadia realized she could hear something. Not a mechanical sound, not an engine or propeller, but a low vibration that she felt more in her chest than heard with her ears. The sphere reached the cliff wall and stopped. Then, impossibly, it began to rise, straight up the cliff face, moving smoothly, still maintaining that constant distance from the rock. Nadia watched it climb. 50 feet, 100 feet, 150. And she realized with growing alarm that it was coming up to her level. She should have run. Every survival instinct she had was screaming at her to get back to her car and drive away, but she couldn't move. The sphere crested the cliff edge 20 yards from where she stood, and for the first time, she could see it clearly without looking down from above. It was beautiful. That was the disturbing part. The blue light pulsed gently, like breathing, and patterns moved across its surface. Not on its surface, but through it, as if the sphere was made of something translucent that light could travel through in complex paths. The patterns looked almost mathematical, geometric shapes that appeared and dissolved and reformed in sequences that felt meaningful, even though she couldn't understand them. The sphere hovered there, maybe 10 feet above the ground, and Nadia felt that vibration in her chest intensify. Her heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. From something else. Anticipation, recognition. She couldn't name the feeling, but it was pulling her toward the sphere, making her want to reach out and touch it. Then the sphere began to descend. Not slowly, not gradually, but in a sudden drop that made Nadia gasp. It fell towards the cliff edge, towards the rocks below, and she ran forward without thinking, as if she could somehow catch it or stop its fall. She reached the edge just as the sphere touched down on the rocky beach below. When it made contact, everything changed. The sphere seemed to collapse into itself, the blue light intensifying for one brilliant moment before winking out completely. But the light didn't just disappear, it spread. Nadia watched as blue luminescence rippled out from the point of contact, racing across the rocks, into the tide pools, along the cliff face. It looked like someone had spilled glowing paint that flowed against gravity, spreading in patterns that made no physical sense. And then she heard the sound. Not the vibration she'd felt before, but an actual sound. It was like singing, but not quite. Multiple tones layered over each other, harmonizing and clashing, creating something that was almost music, but too alien to qualify as anything human ears were meant to process. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. The rocks, the water, the air itself. Nadia's vision blurred. The world tilted. She staggered backward from the cliff edge, her legs suddenly weak, and sat down hard on the trail. The singing continued for maybe 30 seconds, and during that time she couldn't see properly. Everything had a blue tinge, and the edges of objects seemed to blur and shift, as if reality itself had become uncertain about where things should be. When her vision cleared, the blue glow was gone. The rocks below looked normal. The ocean was dark. The only light came from her dropped flashlight and the regular sweep of the lighthouse beam overhead. But something felt wrong. The air pressure had changed, or maybe the temperature, or maybe something else that she didn't have words for. The night felt different than it had 5 minutes ago. Nadia picked up her flashlight with shaking hands and stood. She needed to tell someone about this. She needed to document it. But more than that, she needed to know if what she'd just seen was real, because already her rational mind was trying to explain it away. Maybe she'd had a dizzy spell. Maybe low blood sugar had caused a hallucination. Maybe she'd witnessed some kind of ball lightning, or other rare weather phenomenon that had a perfectly reasonable scientific explanation. She walked back to her car faster than she'd walked down, her flashlight beam jumping across the trail. When she reached the parking area, she found she wasn't alone. There was a truck parked next to her car, and a man was standing near the lighthouse fence. Camera, with a long telephoto lens mounted on a tripod, pointed out at the ocean. "Did you see it?" Nadia called out, her voice sounding strange in the quiet. "The blue light? Did you see it?" The man turned, startled. He was maybe 35, wearing a heavy jacket and beanie, his breath visible in the cold air. "What blue light?" "Just now, 5 minutes ago. A blue sphere came up the cliff and then dropped back down onto the rocks. It was—" She stopped, realizing how insane she sounded. "You didn't see anything?" The man shook his head, but his expression was more interested than skeptical. "I've been set up here for about 20 minutes trying to catch the lighthouse beam with long exposure shots. I didn't see any blue light, but—" He hesitated. "My camera did something weird. It stopped recording for a few minutes. The timer just froze. And when it started again, there's this gap in the footage." Nadia walked closer, her heart rate picking up again. "What do you mean, a gap?" "I mean, I set it to record continuously, and it was working fine. And then suddenly there's this blank period where nothing recorded. Like someone just deleted a chunk of time." He gestured at his camera. "I was about to pack up because I thought the equipment was malfunctioning, but everything seems fine now." "Can I see?" Nadia asked. The man looked at her for a moment, then shrugged. "Sure, I'm Keegan, by the way, Keegan Holt." Nadia Lorne. Keegan pulled his camera off the tripod and brought up the playback function. He scrolled through footage that showed the lighthouse beam sweeping across the frame. Long exposure shots that turned the rotating light into solid arcs. Then the timestamp jumped. 8:47 p.m. became 8:53 p.m. with no transition, no footage in between. See? Keegan pointed at the display. 6 minutes just gone. And the weird thing is the camera shows it was recording during that time. The file size suggests it captured footage. But when I try to play it, there's nothing there, just blackness, not even static or corruption. Just absence. That's when I saw it, Nadia said quietly. The sphere. It collapsed onto the rocks at 8:47, and everything went strange for a few minutes. Keegan looked at her with new intensity. Tell me exactly what you saw. So she did. She described the blue sphere, the way it climbed the cliff, the patterns moving through it, the collapse and the spreading luminescence. She described the sound, the way her vision had blurred, the feeling that reality had briefly become negotiable. And as she talked, she watched Keegan's expression shift from polite interest to genuine belief. I'm not crazy, she said when she finished. I know how it sounds, but I'm not making this up. I don't think you are, Keegan said slowly, because this isn't the first time I've had equipment malfunction in exactly this way. I'm a wildlife photographer, but I've been coming to this area for months trying to document something else. Unexplained lights over the ocean. And every time I think I've captured something significant, there's a gap in the footage. A blank space where something should be. He pulled out his phone and showed her a folder full of corrupted video files. Dozens of them, all from different dates, all showing the same pattern. Timestamps that jumped. File sizes that suggested content, but playback showing nothing but darkness or distortion. I thought it was my equipment at first, Keegan continued. I replaced my camera, my memory cards, everything. But it keeps happening, only here, only along this stretch of coast, and only during what I'm now pretty sure are encounters with whatever you just saw. Nadia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. So, this happens regularly? These spheres appear regularly? I think so. I've been documenting reports from fishermen, Coast Guard, other hikers. There's a pattern. The sightings cluster around 3 areas. Here at Heseda Head, up at Yakina Head, and down near Cape Perpetua. All places where the coast is rocky and the water gets deep fast. Have you actually seen one? Nadia asked. Not just the equipment malfunctions, but actually seen a sphere. Keegan shook his head. Never clearly. Glimpses, maybe. Lights in the fog that moved wrong. But nothing like what you're describing. You got closer to it than anyone I've interviewed. They stood there in the parking area, 2 strangers brought together by impossible circumstances, and Nadia felt the weight of what she'd witnessed settling onto her shoulders. This wasn't just a weird experience she could laugh off and forget. This was something significant, something that needed to be understood. We should go look, she said suddenly. Right now, if the sphere collapsed onto those rocks, there might be evidence. Marks, or residue, or something. Keegan looked uncertain. It's dark, the trail down to that beach is rough even in daylight, and high tide is... He checked his phone. In about an hour, we'd have to hurry. Then we should hurry. There was a trail that switchbacked down the cliff face to the rocky beach below. Steep and treacherous, but passable for anyone with decent balance and no fear of heights. Nadia led the way, her flashlight beam showing the narrow path ahead. Behind her, she could hear Keegan's breathing and the sound of his boots on loose gravel. It took them 15 minutes to reach the bottom, and by the time they did, the ocean was already closer than Nadia would have liked. Waves crashed against the rocks with force that sent spray 20 feet into the air, and the wind had picked up, making it hard to hear anything but the roar of surf. Where exactly did it come down? Keegan shouted over the noise. Nadia tried to orient herself, looking up at the cliff to find the spot where she'd been standing. There, she pointed, where those 3 big rocks form a triangle. They made their way carefully across the uneven surface, both of them using flashlights to avoid turning an ankle in the gaps between boulders. The tide was coming in fast. Nadia could feel the rocks beneath her feet getting wet, see the water line advancing with each wave. When they reached the triangle of rocks, Nadia stopped. "This is it. The sphere came down right here." But there was nothing unusual to see, just rocks worn smooth by centuries of waves, covered in barnacles and bits of kelp. No scorch marks, no strange residue, no physical evidence that anything out of the ordinary had occurred. "Maybe the water washed it away," Keegan suggested, panning his flashlight across the area. "Or maybe, whatever these things are, they don't leave physical traces." Nadia knelt down, running her hand over the rock surface where she'd seen the sphere collapse. The stone felt normal, cold, slightly damp, rough texture. Nothing remarkable. She was about to give up when her fingers touched something strange. It wasn't a mark on the rock. It was the rock itself. There was a patch about 6 inches across where the texture was different. Smoother, almost polished, but in a way that felt wrong. She pressed her palm flat against it and felt a sensation like mild electric shock. Not painful, just odd. A tingling that ran up her arm. "Keegan, feel this." He knelt beside her and placed his hand where hers had been. His eyes widened. That's not normal. Rocks don't feel like that. They spent several minutes examining the area, and they found 3 more patches with the same strange quality. They formed a pattern, a rough circle, maybe 10 feet in diameter, and at the center was the largest patch, the one Nadia had touched first. "I'm taking samples," Keegan said, pulling a knife from his pocket. He scraped at the rock surface, collecting small chips into a plastic bag. "I know a geologist at the university. Maybe she can analyze this." As he worked, Nadia became aware of something. The sound of the waves had changed. Not louder or quieter, but different somehow. The rhythm was off. Waves should come in sets, random patterns of large and small, but these were hitting with mechanical regularity, every 7 seconds, like clockwork. "Keegan, just a sec, I'm almost... Keegan, look at the water." He looked up, and his hand stopped moving. The waves weren't coming in from the ocean anymore. They were coming from the shore, flowing backward. Water rushing up the beach and then out to sea in a pattern that defied physics and common sense. "That's impossible," Keegan whispered. But it was happening. They watched for maybe 30 seconds as the ocean flowed the wrong direction. And then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The waves resumed their normal pattern, crashing against the rocks from seaward, and the only evidence that anything strange had occurred was the soaking wet rocks further up the beach that shouldn't have been wet yet because the tide hadn't reached that high. "Did you get that on camera?" Nadia asked. Keegan fumbled for his phone, which he'd been using to document the rock samples. He pulled up the video he'd just recorded, but the screen showed only darkness and the sound of his own breathing. No waves, no rocks, no impossible physics. Just another gap, another blank space where documentation should have been. "It deleted itself," he said, his voice hollow. "Or it was never recorded in the first place. Or," he looked at Nadia with an expression caught between wonder and fear, "or whatever these spheres are, they don't want to be documented. They're actively preventing it." Nadia felt the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "We need to leave. The tide's coming in too fast." They scrambled back across the rocks, and by the time they reached the base of the trail, waves were already washing across the path they'd taken. The climb back up was harder than the descent, both of them breathing hard by the time they reached the parking area. It was only when they got back to their vehicles that Nadia realized something was wrong with her phone. The battery was dead. completely drained. It had been at 70% when she'd started her walk, and she'd barely used it. But now it wouldn't even turn on. "Check yours," she said to Keegan. He pulled out his phone. 23% battery remaining, down from 90% less than an hour ago. Both their devices drained to different degrees, but far more than they should have been from normal use. "The electromagnetic field," Keegan said. "When these spheres appear, they must generate some kind of field that drains electronics. That's why recordings fail. That's why my camera keeps malfunctioning." "But why?" Nadia asked. "What are they? What's the purpose of all this?" Keegan had no answer. They stood there in the parking area, two people who'd just witnessed multiple impossible things, and the lighthouse beam swept past overhead in its eternal rotation, oblivious to the strangeness happening beneath it. "I want to come back," Nadia said finally. "Tomorrow night. I want to set up proper observation equipment. If these spheres appear regularly, if there's a pattern, we should be able to predict when one will show up again." "And document it somehow," Keegan added. "There has to be a way to capture evidence that doesn't get erased or corrupted. Film cameras maybe, old technology that isn't electronic. Or just our eyes and our testimony," Nadia suggested. "If two people witness the same thing, that's data too." They exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet the next evening at sunset. As Nadia drove home down the winding coastal highway, her dead phone sitting uselessly in the cup holder, she kept thinking about that moment when the sphere had collapsed. The way the light had spread across the rocks, the singing that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, and she thought about the waves flowing backward, defying gravity and physics and everything humans understood about how water should behave. Whatever these spheres were, they weren't just lights in the sky. They weren't just unexplained phenomena. They were something that could manipulate the fundamental forces of nature, and they were becoming more active. When she finally got home and plugged in her phone, it took several minutes before it would even accept a charge. And when it finally powered on, she found something that made her hands shake. Her photo gallery was empty. Every picture she'd taken in the past month was gone. Not deleted. Gone, as if they'd never existed. The only images that remained were ones taken before September, before she'd started walking the lighthouse trails regularly. The spheres weren't just preventing new documentation. They were erasing old documentation too. And that meant whatever she and Keegan were dealing with, it had reached beyond the immediate moment of encounter. It could affect devices even after the fact, remove evidence retroactively, ensure that no permanent record remained. Nadia sat in her Kit W, staring at her blank photo gallery, and felt the full weight of what they'd stumbled into. This wasn't just an unexplained phenomenon. This was something intelligent. Something with the ability and the apparent desire to remain undocumented. And if it was that determined to hide itself from human observation and recording, what would it do to people who kept trying to capture evidence? She should have been afraid. She should have decided to stay away from the lighthouse, to let someone else investigate these impossible events. But instead, she felt energized, curious, determined to understand what was happening on this stretch of Oregon coast, even if that understanding came without any photographic proof. The spheres wanted to remain mysterious? Too bad. Nadia Lorne had never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. Keegan arrived at the lighthouse parking area 20 minutes before sunset, his truck loaded with equipment. Not just cameras this time, but also a portable radio to monitor frequencies, electromagnetic field detectors borrowed from a friend who ghost hunted as a hobby, and an actual film camera, a vintage Nikon he'd bought that morning from a camera shop in Eugene. If these things interfere with digital electronics, he'd explained over the phone to Nadia, maybe analog film will work. It's just light-hitting, chemically treated paper. No batteries, no electronics to corrupt. Nadia arrived moments later, her own bag full of notebooks, pens, and a voice recorder, also analog, using actual magnetic tape. I figured if we can't capture images, at least we can capture audio, and write down everything we observe in real time. They set up their equipment along the cliff trail where Nadia had seen the sphere the night before. Keegan positioned his film camera on a tripod, aimed at the rocks below where the collapse had occurred. The electromagnetic field detector sat on a flat rock, its needle currently resting at 0. The voice recorder hung from a small tripod of its own, microphone pointed seaward. "I've been researching all day," Keegan said as they worked, "looking for any scientific literature about electromagnetic phenomena that could cause what we saw. Ball lightning is the closest thing, but it doesn't match. Ball lightning appears during storms, lasts seconds, and doesn't behave with the kind of intelligence we witnessed. These spheres, they move with purpose. They react to their environment. They climb cliffs and collapse in specific patterns." "Did you find anything about the backward waves?" Nadia asked. "Nothing. I mean, there are tidal phenomena that can create unusual currents, and rip tides can pull water out to sea, but actual waves flowing from shore to ocean, that violates every principle of fluid dynamics." He paused in adjusting his equipment. "Unless the spheres are somehow generating a localized gravity field strong enough to reverse water flow. That would require enormous energy," Nadia pointed out. "Everything about these spheres requires enormous energy. The light that doesn't illuminate. The electromagnetic fields strong enough to drain batteries and corrupt electronics. The ability to climb vertical surfaces without any visible propulsion. Whatever these things are, they're operating on principles that don't fit into our current understanding of physics." They fell silent as the sun touched the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of orange and red that gradually faded to purple and then darkness. The lighthouse beam began its rotation, and Nadia felt that same anticipation she'd felt the night before. The sense that something was about to happen, building like pressure before a storm. "My geologist friend analyzed those rock samples," Keegan said quietly, his eyes scanning the ocean below. "She said the molecular structure was altered. Not melted or burned, but rearranged. The silicon matrix showed a crystalline pattern that shouldn't form naturally, especially not at surface temperature and pressure. She asked where I got it from, and I told her I found it near a lightning strike. Did she believe you?" "I don't think so. But she didn't press the issue." He checked his watch. 8:32. Your encounter last night happened around 8:47. If these things are following a schedule, then we should see something in the next 15 to 20 minutes, Nadia finished. They watched and waited. The temperature dropped as full darkness settled in. Nadia pulled her jacket tighter, feeling the cold seep into her bones. Below, the waves crashed in their normal, chaotic pattern, and the electromagnetic field detector remained at 0. 8:47 came and went. Nothing happened. "Maybe they don't appear every night," Nadia said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Maybe there's a longer cycle." But even as she spoke, the EM detector's needle jumped. Not much, just a small spike to about 15 milligauss, but enough to notice. Both of them turned to stare at it, and the needle jumped again, this time reaching 30. "Something's happening," Keegan whispered, his hand moving to the film camera's shutter release. The needle climbed steadily. 45 milligauss, 60, 80, and then Nadia saw it. Not from the direction she'd expected, not climbing up the cliff, but emerging from the ocean itself. A blue glow beneath the water's surface, coming closer to shore. "There," she pointed. The sphere broke the surface about 50 yards out, water streaming off it. Except the water wasn't falling normally. It ran upward along the sphere's surface, defying gravity, creating patterns like rivers flowing up a mountain. The sphere rose higher, hovering now 10 feet above the waves, and Nadia could see those same geometric patterns she'd seen the night before, pulsing through its translucent structure. Keegan was photographing it, his film camera's shutter clicking in rapid succession. "I'm getting it. I'm actually getting it on film. There's no electronics to interfere with..." He stopped talking as the sphere began to move. Not toward the cliff this time, but parallel to shore, drifting southward at a steady pace, and behind it, 3 more spheres emerged from the water. Then 3 more. Within a minute, there were a dozen of them, all hovering above the waves in a loose formation, all pulsing with that same blue light. "This is different from last night," Nadia said, her voice shaking slightly. "Last night, it was just 1 sphere. Now there's..." The EM detector needle slammed to its maximum reading and stuck there. 200 milligauss. Far higher than natural background levels, higher than Nadia would have expected from anything except industrial equipment or a lightning strike. And then the singing started. It was the same sound Nadia had heard during the collapse, multiple tones layering over each other, harmonizing and clashing, but louder now, much louder. It came from all the spheres at once, and it resonated in her chest and skull and bones. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just acoustic. It was something else, something that bypassed normal hearing. Beside her, Keegan had dropped to his knees, his hands also pressed to his ears. "What is that?" he shouted, barely audible over the tones. "What are they doing?" The spheres began to pulse in unison now, all 12 of them flashing bright and dim in perfect synchronization. And with each pulse, Nadia felt something in her mind shift. Images appeared. Not visual images, but concepts, ideas, information pushing into her consciousness without permission. She saw deep ocean trenches, miles below the surface where sunlight never reached. She saw geological time compressed into seconds, continents drifting, seas rising and falling, the slow dance of tectonic plates. She saw the spheres not as individual objects, but as extensions of something larger, nodes in a network that spread across the ocean floor like neurons in a vast brain. The vision lasted maybe 10 seconds, and when it ended, Nadia found herself on the ground, her face pressed against the cold trail dirt. Her nose was bleeding. Beside her, Keegan was in the same position, blood trickling from both his nostrils and his right ear. "Did you see it?" he gasped. "Did you see what they showed us?" "The network," Nadia said, pushing herself up to sitting. "They're connected, all of them, and there are more, hundreds, maybe thousands spread across the ocean floor." The spheres were descending now, sinking back beneath the waves, their blue glow fading as they went deeper. Within minutes, they were gone entirely, and the EM detector needle dropped back to 0. The singing stopped. The night returned to its normal sounds. Wind, waves, the distant hoot of an owl. Keegan crawled to his film camera and checked it with shaking hands. "The film advance mechanism is jammed. Something melted the internal gears. The whole camera is ruined." Nadia grabbed the voice recorder. She pressed rewind, then play. Static burst from the speaker, loud and harsh, and beneath it she could hear the singing, but distorted, slowed down to half speed and overlaid with sounds that might have been words in some language she didn't recognize. She stopped the playback. "At least we got audio. That's something." "But will it stay?" Keegan asked. "Or will it disappear like everything else?" They sat there on the trail for another 10 minutes, neither of them ready to move yet. Nadia's head ached, and the taste of blood in her mouth was making her nauseous. Finally, they helped each other up and made their way back to the parking area. "I need to understand the pattern." Keegan said as they loaded equipment into his truck. If there's a schedule to when these spheres appear, we can predict it. And if we can predict it, maybe we can bring better equipment, or more witnesses, or... He stopped, realizing the problem. More witnesses means more people experiencing what we just experienced, Nadia finished. Bleeding from their ears and having visions forced into their heads. We can't just bring random people up here without warning them what might happen. So what do? Nadia thought about the vision she'd seen. The network spreading across the ocean floor. The sense of vast intelligence that the spheres were part of. We learn more. We observe from a safer distance, and we try to figure out what they want. Want? Keegan looked at her skeptically. You think they want something? They're intelligent, that much is obvious. The question is whether they're trying to communicate or just conducting their own observations. If it's communication, then there's information in those visions. Meaning, something they're trying to tell us. Over the next week, they returned to the lighthouse every night. Not to the cliff trail. That felt too exposed, too dangerous after the nosebleeds and the forced vision. Instead, they watched from the parking area with binoculars and a telescope, maintaining distance while still observing. The spheres appeared 5 out of 7 nights. Never the same number, sometimes 2 or 3, sometimes a dozen or more. They followed patterns that Keegan began documenting in a notebook. Formation types, movement patterns, duration of appearances. He cross-referenced these with tidal data, lunar phases, seismic activity. There's a correlation with small earthquakes, he explained on the 6th night, showing Nadia his notes. Every time a magnitude 2.5 or larger quake happens offshore, the spheres appear within 12 hours, and they appear more frequently during the new moon. Why would lunar phase matter? Nadia asked. I don't know, but it does. Look at the data. It's consistent across 2 months of observation. He'd been pulling records from other witnesses, building a database of sightings. And there's something else. The formation patterns repeat. Watch. He showed her sketches he'd made. Geometric arrangements of spheres that appeared, dissolved, reformed in new configurations. Triangle formations, squares, hexagons. Complex, 3-dimensional structures that rotated and pulsed in synchronized patterns. They're beautiful, Nadia said, studying the drawings. Like art or mathematics, or both. I think it's language, Keegan said quietly. I think the formations are how they communicate, and we're watching conversations we're not equipped to understand. Then we need to learn their language. It sounded absurd, saying it out loud, but Nadia meant it. If the spheres were intelligent, if they were trying to communicate, then human observers had a responsibility to at least attempt understanding. Even if that understanding came slowly, even if it required observing for months or years. On the 8th night, something new happened. The spheres appeared as usual, a group of 7 forming a complex 3-dimensional pattern above the water. But this time, one sphere broke away from the formation and came toward the cliff. Not rapidly, not threateningly, but with clear purpose. It stopped 50 feet from where Nadia and Keegan stood in the parking area, hovering at eye level, pulsing with that familiar blue light. And then it did something neither of them had seen before. It became transparent. The blue light faded until they could see through it, and inside the sphere was something else. Is that water? Nadia whispered. It was. The sphere contained a perfect sphere of ocean water, suspended somehow, and within that water, something moved. Something dark and serpentine, coiling through the liquid in patterns that reminded Nadia of the geometric formations she'd been watching. The creature, if that's what it was, seemed aware of them. It oriented towards the 2 humans watching, and for a moment, Nadia had the disturbing sensation of being studied. Then the sphere turned opaque again, its blue light returning, and drifted back to rejoin the formation. The 7 spheres sank beneath the waves and disappeared, leaving Nadia and Keegan standing in stunned silence. "There's something alive inside them," Keegan said, his voice hollow. "Something organic. These aren't just energy constructs or physics phenomena. There's biology involved." "Or the spheres are containers," Nadia suggested. "Transportation. Maybe the things inside them are what's actually intelligent, and the spheres are just how they move through air. Deep sea organisms," Keegan said slowly, pieces clicking together in his mind. "What if these are creatures from the deep ocean, from trenches where the pressure is hundreds of times atmospheric? They couldn't survive coming to the surface normally. They'd explode from decompression. But if they're in some kind of field that maintains pressure, then they could travel anywhere," Nadia finished. "Into shallow water, into air, maybe even onto land. The spheres aren't the phenomenon. They're vehicles for something that lives in the deepest parts of the ocean." It was the first explanation that made any kind of sense, and it opened up more questions than it answered. What were these deep-sea creatures? How long had they been down there? Why were they surfacing now in increasing numbers? And what did they want with the surface world and the humans who occupied it? "We need to go deeper," Keegan said. "Not literally. I'm not suggesting we dive down to these things, but we need to understand more about the deep ocean ecosystem, about what lives down there that science hasn't documented yet. Because whatever those creatures are, they're not in any biology textbook I've ever seen." They spent the next several days researching, reaching out to marine biologists, reading papers about deep-sea exploration. And the more they learned, the more convinced Nadia became that they'd stumbled onto something unprecedented, something that could change fundamental assumptions about life on Earth. "There's more biomass in the deep ocean than everywhere else combined," she told Keegan during one of their research sessions. "But we've only explored about 5% of it. The deepest trenches, the abyssal plains, they're less mapped than the surface of Mars. Anything could be down there. Including intelligence," Keegan said. "We assume humans are the only intelligent species on Earth, but that's based on observing surface-dwelling organisms. What about things that live miles down, in environments we can barely access? What if intelligence evolved separately down there?" It should have sounded like science fiction, but after watching the spheres, after seeing the creature moving inside one, after experiencing the forced vision of the network spreading across the ocean floor, Nadia couldn't dismiss the possibility. On their 12th night of observation, the spheres appeared in the largest formation yet, more than 20 of them, arranged in a structure that filled a 100-foot cube of space above the water. They pulsed in complex sequences, light flowing from one sphere to another in patterns that almost resembled electrical signals moving through neurons. And then they did something new. As one, they turned toward the shore, toward the cliff, toward the lighthouse and the 2 humans watching them. The formation rotated, maintaining its structure, until it was oriented directly at Nadia and Keegan. "They know we're here," Nadia said, her heart pounding. "They know we've been watching." The spheres held that position for 30 seconds, an eternity when being observed by something incomprehensible. Then they dissolved the formation and sank beneath the waves, leaving only dark ocean and the sweep of the lighthouse beam overhead. Keegan's hands were shaking as he closed his observation notebook. "They're aware of us. This whole time, they've been aware of us watching them. And I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think they've been allowing it. They could have stopped us at any time. They have the technology or ability or whatever you want to call it to interfere with our equipment, to erase our recordings. But they've let us keep observing. Why? Maybe they want to be observed, Nadia suggested. Maybe they're trying to make contact, and they're waiting to see if we're intelligent enough to understand. Or maybe they're studying us the same way we're studying them, Keegan countered. And we're just lab rats to them, interesting specimens that they check on periodically. There was no way to know which interpretation was correct, but that night, as Nadia drove home, she couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental was shifting. The sphere's awareness of human observation meant that whatever happened next, it would be interactive. A dialogue, however incomprehensible, between two forms of intelligence that had evolved in completely different environments. And dialogue meant consequences, actions and reactions. The potential for understanding, but also the potential for catastrophic miscommunication. She just hoped humans were smart enough to avoid the latter. It happened on the 14th night. Nadia and Keegan had set up their observation post as usual, but this time they brought someone else, Dr. Patricia Moreno, a marine biologist from Oregon State University, who specialized in deep-sea organisms. Keegan had convinced her to come by showing her the audio recording, which hadn't been erased, and some of the rock samples that still showed altered molecular structure. "I don't believe in UFOs," Moreno said as they waited for darkness. "But I do believe in undocumented species, and if there's something living in the deep ocean that we haven't classified yet, I want to see it." The spheres appeared at 9:03 p.m., 6 of them this time, rising from the water in a hexagonal formation. They didn't pulse randomly. They pulsed in sequence, each sphere lighting up a fraction of a second after the one beside it, creating a wave of light that rotated around the hexagon. "That's impossible," Moreno whispered, watching through binoculars. "There's no way that's a natural phenomenon. That's organized behavior." "Wait," Nadia said. "They're coming closer." The formation moved toward the cliff, and unlike previous nights, it didn't stop at a safe distance. The spheres came all the way to the cliff edge, hovering just beyond the guardrail where the three humans stood, close enough that Nadia could see the patterns moving through them clearly, close enough that she could feel the vibration in her chest. One sphere broke away from the formation and drifted even closer. 10 feet away, 5. It stopped directly in front of Dr. Moreno, who stood frozen, her binoculars forgotten in her hands. "What's it doing?" Moreno asked, her voice tight with controlled fear. The sphere began to change. Its blue light dimmed, and like the one that had shown them the creature inside, it became transparent. But this time, what they saw wasn't a serpentine organism. It was something else entirely, a structure, complex and crystalline, that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the three humans could properly perceive. "It's showing us something," Keegan said, his camera raised despite knowing the photos probably wouldn't come out. "But I don't understand what." The structure rotated, and Nadia realized she was seeing the network from her vision. But not a flat representation. This was three-dimensional, showing connections that spread not just horizontally but vertically, deep into the ocean floor. And at certain junction points, there were concentrations, nodes where the network was particularly dense. "It's a map," she said suddenly. "They're showing us where they are, where the main, what? Colonies? Settlements?" The sphere pulsed once brightly, and the structure inside shifted. Now it showed something moving through the network, signals perhaps, or organisms, flowing from node to node in patterns that resembled traffic on highways or data packets on the internet. "Communication infrastructure," Moreno said, her scientific mind engaging despite her fear. "That's what we're looking at. These spheres are part of a communication network. But communicating what, and for what purpose?" The sphere showed them one more thing before going opaque again. The view zoomed in on one of the nodes, and they saw spheres being generated, emerging from some kind of source deep underwater and rising toward the surface in streams. Dozens of them, hundreds, all heading upward. Then the display ended. The sphere returned to its solid blue appearance and drifted back to rejoin the formation. The hexagon rotated once more, and then all 6 spheres sank simultaneously beneath the waves, leaving the 3 humans standing in stunned silence. "They're trying to communicate," Moreno said finally. "This isn't random appearance and disappearance. They're deliberately showing us information, trying to help us understand." "But understand what?" Keegan asked. "That they exist. That they're intelligent. We already knew that. Maybe they're trying to explain why they're surfacing," Nadia suggested. "If there's increased activity, if more spheres are being generated and sent up, maybe something's changed in the deep ocean. Maybe something's wrong." Moreno pulled out her phone and started typing rapidly. "I need to check something. The research station monitors ocean temperature, salinity, pH levels. If there's been a significant change in deep water conditions, it would show up in the data." She pulled up graphs, scrolling through months of measurements. "Here, look at this. Deep ocean temperature off the Oregon coast has increased by 0.8 degrees Celsius in the past year. That might not sound like much, but at those depths, that's unprecedented. And pH levels have dropped. The water's becoming more acidic. These are the same changes causing problems for coral reefs and other shallow water organisms." "So the deep ocean is changing too," Nadia said. "And whatever these creatures are, they're being affected by it. Maybe that's why they're surfacing more frequently. Maybe they're looking for new habitat. Or maybe they're trying to warn us," Keegan added. "If they're intelligent enough to have a communication network, they're intelligent enough to understand cause and effect. They might know that human activity is causing these changes, and they're trying to tell us to stop." It was a sobering thought. If the spheres were attempts at communication from a deep-sea intelligence affected by climate change and ocean acidification, then humanity was being put on notice by another form of life on its own planet. Life that humans hadn't even known existed until recently. "We need to document this properly," Moreno said. "Not just casual observation, but real scientific study. I can get funding for a research project, bring in specialists." "No," Nadia interrupted. "You can't. Because the moment you bring in official researchers and government funding, this becomes classified. It gets buried under national security concerns, and then the spheres either stop appearing, or the whole thing disappears into some military black project and we never learn the truth." Moreno looked like she wanted to argue, but she couldn't. They all knew how these things worked. Unexplained phenomena didn't stay unexplained for long once official channels got involved. They just became officially unexplainable, locked away where curious eyes couldn't reach. "So what do we do?" Moreno asked. "We keep watching," Keegan said. "We keep documenting what we can, even if recordings get erased. We take notes, we sketch what we see, we analyze what they show us. And we try to understand what they're telling us because I think—" He paused, looking out at the dark ocean. "I think they're running out of time. And so are we." Over the next month, the pattern continued. Spheres appearing nightly, sometimes in small groups, sometimes in formations of 20 or more. Each appearance was documented in notebooks, sketched in detail, analyzed for patterns and meaning. The forced visions became more frequent. Almost every encounter now included a brief pulse of information, images or concepts pushed into the observers' minds. Nadia, Keegan, and Moreno, who had become a regular part of their observation team, began to understand pieces of what they were being shown. The deep ocean network was ancient, possibly millions of years old. The intelligences that maintained it were distributed. No central consciousness, but rather a colony intelligence spread across vast distances. They had been watching human development for centuries, observing the surface world the way humans observe ants or fish in an aquarium. But recently, their environment had been changing, warming, acidifying, filling with plastic and chemicals that descended from the surface world like poison rain. And the intelligence was responding the only way it knew how, by trying to communicate with the creatures causing the change. "They can't come to us," Moreno explained during one of their late-night discussions. "Not really. The creatures inside those spheres would die instantly in surface pressure and temperature. The spheres themselves are the only way they can interact with our environment. But they're not built for land or air. They're aquatic vehicles that can briefly exist outside water. So these appearances are like, what, enormous effort on their part?" Keegan asked. "Think about it like a human trying to explore deep space with current technology. It's possible, but barely. The spheres are their equivalent of spacesuits. Temporary protection allowing them to venture into an environment that would otherwise kill them instantly." It reframed everything. These weren't casual observations or curious visits. Each appearance represented significant effort and risk from the intelligence beneath the waves. They were that desperate to make contact, to communicate, to somehow bridge the gap between their reality and human reality. "What do they want us to do?" Nadia asked during their 31st night of observation. "If we're understanding correctly, if they're trying to tell us that ocean conditions are killing them, what's the solution? We can't just fix ocean acidification overnight. That would require global changes in how humans produce energy, manufacture goods, live our lives." "Maybe they know that," Moreno suggested. "Maybe they're not asking for a solution. Maybe they're just making sure we understand the consequences, that we know we're not alone on this planet, and our actions affect other intelligences, not just ourselves." The spheres appeared that night in the largest formation yet, 43 of them, arranged in a complex three-dimensional structure that took 5 minutes to complete. When they were all in position, pulsing in synchronized patterns, they showed the three humans one final vision. It wasn't of the present or past. It was of the future. 2 possible futures, actually, displayed side by side like a split screen. In one, the ocean grew warmer and more acidic. The deep-sea network failed, nodes going dark one by one. The spheres stopped appearing. The intelligence beneath the waves slowly faded away, unable to adapt fast enough to the changing conditions. And the surface world continued on, unaware that it had killed the only other sentient species on its planet. In the other, something changed. Humans understood the message. They took action. The ocean stabilized, began to heal. The network recovered, grew stronger, and the spheres continued to appear. Bridges between two intelligent species learning to coexist on the same world. The vision ended. The formation dissolved. The spheres sank beneath the waves one final time. And Nadia understood this wasn't a warning. It was a choice being presented. A fork in the road where humanity could decide whether it wanted to share its planet or destroy the other intelligence inhabiting it. "We have to tell people," she said, her voice shaking. "Not governments or military or scientists who will classify everything. Regular people. We have to share what we've learned. But we have no proof," Keegan pointed out. "No recordings that haven't been corrupted. No physical evidence that can't be explained away. Just our testimony and our notes." "Then our testimony and notes will have to be enough," Nadia replied. "Because if we don't try, if we keep this quiet out of fear that we won't be believed, then we've already chosen the first future. The one where the network fails and the intelligence dies and humans never know what they lost. Moreno nodded slowly. I can write a paper. It'll be career suicide, probably. I'll be labeled a crackpot. But I have credentials, a platform. If I publish what we've observed, even if no one believes it, at least the information will be out there. I'll post everything online, Keegan added. The observations, the patterns, the analysis. Maybe it gets dismissed as hoax or delusion, but maybe a few people listen. Maybe those people investigate for themselves, see the spheres, and start to understand. They left the lighthouse that night knowing it might be their last observation. The spheres had shown them what they needed to see, delivered their message as clearly as the gap between species would allow. Whatever happened next was up to humans. As Nadia drove home, she thought about the choice they'd been presented. The fork in the road. It wasn't really about saving the deep-sea intelligence, she realized. It was about whether humanity could mature enough to recognize that it shared its world with other forms of consciousness, other types of intelligence that deserved consideration and protection. The spheres were just the messengers, but the message was profound. You're not alone, and your actions have consequences beyond what you can see. A week later, Moreno published her paper in an open-access journal. It was immediately controversial, widely criticized and largely dismissed by the mainstream scientific community. But it was read by graduate students, by amateur researchers, by people who'd seen strange lights along the Oregon coast and had been told they were imagining things. Keegan posted his observations and sketches online, a detailed record of pattern and formation. The post went viral in certain circles, dismissed by skeptics, embraced by believers, but most importantly, seen by thousands of people who now knew what to look for. And Nadia wrote her own account, as detailed and honest as she could make it, and shared it widely. She knew most people wouldn't believe her, but some would. Some would go to the lighthouse themselves, would watch the ocean at night, would see the blue spheres and understand that something profound was happening just offshore. The spheres continued to appear, though less frequently now. Their message had been delivered. The choice had been presented. Now they could only wait to see what humans would decide. Nadia still walked the lighthouse trails, still watched the ocean. Sometimes she saw the familiar blue glow beneath the waves. Sometimes she felt that vibration in her chest that meant the spheres were near. And sometimes, on very still nights, she heard the singing carried on the wind, that multi-tonal harmony that wasn't quite music but wasn't quite anything else either. Each time, she felt a mixture of hope and sadness, hope that humanity might be capable of choosing the better future. Sadness that it had taken a message from an alien intelligence to make humans consider the consequences of their actions. The recordings never worked. Every photo, every video, every audio file ended up corrupted or erased. The spheres maintained their mystery, refusing to be definitively proven or documented. But that didn't matter anymore. Enough people had seen them. Enough people understood that something extraordinary was happening along the Oregon coast. And maybe, just maybe, that understanding would be enough to tip the scales toward the future where both intelligences survived, where humans learned to share their planet instead of dominating it, where the blue spheres continued to appear, bridges between ocean and air, between known and unknown, between two species so different they could barely communicate but determined to try anyway. Nadia kept her notebooks, kept watching, kept hoping, because that's what humans do. They observe, they learn, they adapt. At least the best of them do. And she had to believe that humanity's best qualities would eventually outweigh its worst ones. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark ocean, eternal and unchanging. And beneath those waves, in depths humans had barely explored, An ancient intelligence waited to see what choice the surface world would make. The message had been delivered. The future was undecided, and time, as always, would tell.